Chapter 1209. Xiao Xing chose to accept Xiao Qin's suggestion. In fact, this was very normal. First of all, Xiao Qin, Long Qing, and Chen Ling could be said to be the leaders of all the disciples in the sacred palace. Moreover, Xiao Xing was very clear about their personalities. It was impossible for them to speak carelessly about such an important matter. Given Xiao Qin and the other two's personalities, since they had spoken, it must be true. Moreover, as Xiao Qin said, even if this matter was false, there was no harm in making early preparations for the sacred palace. As Xiao Xing spoke, Randeng, Binglian, and Mengjie nodded in succession after a brief moment of silence. All right, making early preparations is better than taking precautions. In that case, let's do as Chen and the others say. They accepted Xiao Qin and the other two's suggestion. The preparation work was actually not complicated. It was just a matter of time and effort. However, the current sacred palace could still support the consumption of financial and material resources. According to Chen Ling, once the four astral boundaries and the central world merged, the experts of the various races would begin to act as a quasi-sage sect of the human race. The human race great saints in the central world would obviously rope in the sacred palace and provide protection and certain resources for the sacred palace. This was certain. After all, the 100 Races War was not based on sects or families, but on races. This was the meaning of the heavenly Tao. Therefore, every race was equivalent to a force. In order to let their own race win the 100 Races War, the warriors of the same race would definitely be very united. There was no doubt about this. After all, if they were divided, it would be detrimental to both sides. Everyone understood this simple logic. Moreover, during the 100 Races War, if there was still internal strife, it could only be said that they were digging their own graves. But on the other hand, the great sage of one's own race would provide protection, but the experts of the other races would definitely attack. Therefore, the moment of fusion was the most dangerous. If the great sage of another race found the sacred palace first, then the sacred palace would be in danger. However, this also depended on luck. After the fusion, where would the heavenly Qin continent appear? If it happened to appear in the territory of the human race, then there would be nothing to worry about. However, one could never place one's hopes on luck. Therefore, the necessary preparations had to be made. At the very least, the sacred palace needed to have the ability to stall for time until the great sage of the human race arrived. Combining all of the above reasons, Chen Ling's suggestion was to use the heavenly Qin continent as their priority. First, they had to set up a massive defensive formation to protect the heavenly Qin continent. This formation was huge, and it consumed a lot of resources. However, there was no other way. It had to be done. Next, a defensive formation was set up in every city and sect. This was the second layer of protection. Of course, the sacred palace didn't need to be engraved, but it needed to be strengthened. With these two layers of protection, they should be able to stall for some time. As for the rest, it would depend on the situation when the time came. The formation that enveloped the entire heavenly Qin continent had to be at least a top saint-grade formation. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to stop the great sage. Next, a top saint-grade defensive formation had to be set up in every city and sect. These two sieges were incomparably huge, but it was all worth it. On the same day, Xiao Xing and the others issued orders according to Chen Ling's suggestion. The ones who completed this important task were naturally the Mulan Sacred Palace led by Quan Lan. The Mulan Sacred Palace was now the gathering place of the Sacred Palace's Talisman Masters and Talisman Array Masters. The matter of engraving talisman arrays was naturally left to the Mulan Sacred Palace. Of course, several Sacred Palace Saint Venerables who also cultivated talisman arrays would also help this time. They didn't understand why the four ancestors had suddenly issued such an order, but the Sacred Palace quickly got to work under the four ancestors' orders. Batch after batch of large amounts of resources were transported to the hands of the Mulan Sacred Palace's Saintess, Quan Lan. The construction of the talisman arrays began immediately. The various sects and families of the heavenly Chun continent didn't return to the Sacred Palace's actions. On the contrary, they were very cooperative. This was normal. After all, the Sacred Palace was engraving defensive formations for them. This was a good thing, so only a fool would refuse. The engraving of the formations proceeded in an orderly manner. Half a month later, the Sacred Palace's actions attracted the attention of 9 heavens and the other 4 great sections. At the same time, the 4 great sects sent people to the Sacred Palace one after another. Shao Xing and the other 3 received them personally. No one knew what they discussed, but after the 4 great sects left, they began to imitate the Sacred Palace and began to draw defensive formations. Of course, the 4 great sects also gave the Sacred Palace great benefit. It felt like they were using money to buy information. Shao Chen naturally guessed some of the 4 great sects' actions. It was very likely that Shao Xing and the others had told 9 heavens and the other 4 great sects about the central world. However, this information wasn't given for free. To put it bluntly, it was sold. The Sacred Palace sold this information to 9 heavens and the other 4 great sects at a high price. The 5 great sects of the North Star world were currently at the peak of their power and had begun to construct defensive formations on a large scale at the same time. This puzzled everyone in the North Star world, but the 5 great sects didn't say anything about this, nor did any news spread. Shao Chen didn't care much about the 5 great sects' actions. After all, he didn't know how to construct talisman arrays. It was better to leave this matter to a professional like Quan Lan. After cultivating in seclusion for more than half a month, Shao Chen finally waited for the day when the Black Demon Mountain would be opened. As one of the 2 secret zones that the Sacred Palace had just obtained, the opening of Black Demon Mountain was naturally a major event for the Sacred Palace. Because of Shao Chen, Qin Shuru, Gu Lingyao and Fairy of 100 Flowers were also fortunate enough to enter Black Demon Mountain to cultivate. Even Fei Mei, Qin Yao, Qin Luo and the other girls were qualified to enter the secret cultivation zone. Thinking about it, Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and the other girls were not disciples of the Holy Palace. They were just Shao Chen's maidservants. But now they were all qualified to enter the secret cultivation zone to cultivate. Perhaps this was what people often said about following the right person. The sky had only just brightened, but many disciples had already gathered at the entrance of Black Demon Mountain and the 18 ghost zones. However, most of these people were clearly here to watch the show. Only a very small number of people were truly qualified to enter. Of course, in addition to the Sacred Palace disciples, 9 heavens had also sent 5 chosen. Including Tianyu, there were exactly 6 people, which coincided with the 6 spots that the Sacred Palace had previously promised. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 12:10. The 9 heavens had sent out 6 chosen to enter the 18 ghost regions and Black Demon Mountain to cultivate. At this moment, Shao Chen, Long Qing, Chen Ling, Tianyu, Qin Shuru, Flower Fairy, Gu Lingyao, and the others were waiting at the entrance of Black Demon Mountain. Actually, the main reason they'd entered Black Demon Mountain this time was for Qin Shuru and the others. During this period of time, Shao Chen, Chen Ling, Long Qing, and the others had entered the secret realm to cultivate. Only Qin Shuru and the others hadn't entered the secret realm. So, the gap between their cultivations had been pulled apart because of this. This time, Shao Chen mainly hoped to improve their cultivations. As for himself, Shao Chen didn't have any hope. After all, he'd just broken through to the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, and it was extremely difficult for him to break through again even with the help of Black Demon Mountain. After all, even though the secret realm was formidable, it wasn't omnipotent. Otherwise, wouldn't any quasi-saint sect be filled with saints? Qin Shuru and the others were slightly excited because they were about to enter the secret realm for the first time. Actually, their natural talent wasn't much inferior to the chosen. To put it bluntly, the reason they didn't have the qualifications to enter the secret realm was entirely because of Shao Chen. The three of them didn't want to leave Shao Chen's side, so they didn't care about the empty title of chosen. Coupled with the fact that when the 9 heavens and the other 3 sects opened the secret realm, they'd clearly stated that only the chosen of the 5 sects could enter. So, the 3 of them had lost the qualifications to enter. The 3 of them had done a lot for Shao Chen, so Shao Chen was naturally moved. So this time, Shao Chen would rather not cultivate himself so that the 3 of them could obtain the greatest amount of benefits from Black Demon Mountain. They didn't have to wait for long before Shao Xing and the other 4 ancestors appeared in the air. The entrances of Black Demon Mountain and the 18 ghost regions were right next to each other, so all the disciples quickly quieted down when Shao Xing and the others appeared. This was the first time the Sacred Palace had opened its Heritage Secret Zone, so it could be considered an exception. Apart from the 6 chosen and saintesses of 9th Heaven, the 10 chosen and saintesses of the Sacred Palace, as well as all the prospective chosen and saintesses, were qualified to enter Black Demon Mountain and the 18 ghost zones. Sweeping their eyes over the disciples present, Shao Xing and the other 3 didn't say anything. Bing Lian and Mengjie directly opened the entrances to the 2 secret realms. As soon as the entrances opened, the chosen and Mengjie, the prospective chosen, and the prospective chosen of holy regions rushed into the secret realm. The chosen were all chosen and Mengjie, and the chosen were chosen were extremely excited to enter the secret realm. But, of course, compared to their excitement, the surrounding ordinary disciples were envious. This was because they did not have the qualifications to enter the Heritage Secret Realm. If they wanted to enter the Heritage Secret Realm, they would have to work hard. Like the others, Shao Chen led Tianyu, Qin Shuru, and the other 2 girls, as well as Chun Ling and Long Qing, into the Black Demon Mountain under the envious gazes of countless people. Everyone had already learned about Black Demon Mountain, so they weren't too surprised when they saw the giant Black Mountain in front of them after passing through the entrance. The entire Black Demon Mountain world was very simple. Other than a huge black mountain peak in the center, which was enough to make one speechless, there was nothing else. This giant Black Mountain was the only and most precious part of Black Demon Mountain. It was said that this Black Mountain was the first mountain formed when the North Star Realm was first formed. It was born with the ability to store, gather, and refine the world's spirit energy. Moreover, the world's spirit energy refined by Black Demon Mountain was extremely easy for people to refine. Therefore, cultivating on Black Demon Mountain was much easier than cultivating in the outside world. However, although Black Demon Mountain had such a terrifying ability, it also had some limitations. There was a mysterious pressure on Black Demon Mountain. Moreover, the closer one was to the top, the stronger the pressure. Of course, the closer one was to the top, the better the effect of cultivation. However, the prerequisite was that one had to be able to withstand the terrifying pressure. The top of the mountain was undoubtedly the best place to cultivate. However, the chosen and Mengjie, who entered Black Demon Mountain with Shao Chen and the others, couldn't even reach the top of Black Demon Mountain. Very few people could even reach the middle of the mountain. The chosen and Mengjie climbed Black Demon Mountain with all their might until they could no longer withstand the pressure of Black Demon Mountain. Only then would they choose to stop. Everyone knew that the closer one was to the top, the better the effect would be. Therefore, many people also wanted to do their best to get closer to the top. Seeing these chosen and Mengjie climb Black Demon Mountain, Shao Chen looked at Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls and said, "Let's go too." As he spoke, Shao Xing, Tianyu, Chun Ling, and Long Qing acted together to protect Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls. They directly flew towards the top of Black Demon Mountain. He didn't let the three girls climb like the others. In fact, with their strength, climbing to the middle of the mountain was definitely not a problem. However, it was still a little difficult for them to reach the top. This was also because their cultivation was a little low. They were only at the perfection Tao King realm. Since they were already here, they naturally had to go to the best place to cultivate. So, Xiao Chen couldn't be bothered to waste time and directly led Qin Shuru and the other two girls to the top of the mountain. Presently, Xiao Chen, Tianyu, Chen Ling, and Long Qing were all at the perfection Tao King realm. Moreover, every single one of them possessed extraordinary combat strength. So, it wasn't too difficult for them to bring Qin Shuru and the other two girls to the top of the mountain. As they watched Qin Shuru and the other two girls easily and swiftly walk towards the top of the mountain under the protection of Xiao Chen's group of four, all the chosen and Mingjie revealed expressions of envy along the way. It wasn't that Xiao Chen didn't want to help them in the face of their envy. However, he was truly powerless to do so. After all, the pressure on Black Demon Mountain was no joke. Xiao Chen's group of four were already at their limits protecting Qin Shuru and the other two girls. It was impossible for another person to successfully bring them to the top of the mountain. So, Xiao Chen's ability was limited, and he could only apologize. After all, compared to them, Xiao Chen was naturally more important to the people by his side. If he couldn't even help the people by his side and still wanted to help outsiders, then he wasn't being kind but foolish. All along the way, they smoothly arrived at the top of the mountain without any mishap. At this moment, Xiao Xing's group of four still didn't rest. They took the initiative to resist the pressure on the top of the mountain so that the three girls could cultivate wholeheartedly. This time, Qin Shuru and the other two girls were at the center. Everything that Xiao Chen's group of four did was for the sake of allowing the three girls to obtain the best cultivation environment and maximizing their benefits as much as possible. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. Chapter 12:11. Xiao Chen's group of four sat around the three women and enveloped them with their auras, helping them resist the terrifying pressure at the peak of Black Demon Mountain. In this way, the three women could wholeheartedly immerse themselves in their cultivation. Just by sitting cross-legged, the three women could sense strands of pure spirit energy ceaselessly entering their bodies from within the mountain. The spirit energy was extremely pure without the slightest impurity. Moreover, they practically didn't need to refine it before it could be converted into their own spirit energy. After sitting cross-legged, Gu Lingyao looked at Xiao Chen, who was similarly sitting cross-legged in front of her, and a wisp of a smile appeared on her face as she said, "Husband, are we cheating by doing this?" The three women naturally noticed Xiao Chen's actions. It could be said that Xiao Chen had arranged everything for the three women during their cultivation on Black Demon Mountain this time. The three women only needed to focus on their cultivation and didn't need to care about anything else. Xiao Chen would deal with it. Such actions were indeed similar to cheating in the eyes of others, but no one would say anything about it. Firstly, Qin Shuru and the other two women were Xiao Chen's women, so Xiao Chen's actions were understandable. Secondly, Xiao Chen was the first chosen of the sacred palace, so he didn't need to care about what others thought of him at all. Xiao Chen smiled angrily when he heard Gu Lingyao's words. Make the best use of your time to cultivate and strive to break through to the Tao Emperor realm this time. This time, Xiao Chen's goal for the three women was to break through to the Tao Emperor realm in one go. Breaking through to the Tao Emperor realm was indeed a little too high of a goal, and it was clearly impossible to succeed under normal circumstances. However, things were different now that they had Black Demon Mountain. The three women had a very high chance of breaking through to the Tao Emperor realm in one go if they cultivated here. Gu Lingyao stuck out her tongue cutely when she heard Xiao Chen's words, and then she closed her eyes and started cultivating as well. Cultivation on Black Demon Mountain was very peaceful. With the help of Xiao Chen's group of four, the three women's cultivation improved rapidly. Although the three women had missed the opportunity to enter the secret realm some time ago, they didn't slack off in their cultivation at all. They weren't far from the Tao Emperor realm, so with the help of Black Demon Mountain and Xiao Chen's group, their cultivation naturally improved rapidly. Time passed day by day. The two secret realms would be open for a month this time. A month sounded like a long time, but it was only the blink of an eye during cultivation. 20+ days, Xiao Chen's group of 4, the three women's auras. When he sensed the appearance of the three women's auras, Xiao Chen, who had his eyes closed, smiled and said, "They're about to break through." During this month, Xiao Chen, Tianyu, Chunling, and Long Qing didn't cultivate. Instead, they used all their energy to resist the pressure of Black Demon Mountain for the three women. The pressure on the mountain peak wasn't weak, so it wasn't easy for Xiao Chen's group of 4 to resist it. This could be seen from their pale faces. It wasn't hard to imagine that the 4 of them had consumed a lot of energy during these 20+ days to help Qin Shuru's group of 3 resist the pressure of Black Demon Mountain. In order to help Qin Shuru's group of 3 break through to the Tao Emperor realm as soon as possible, Xiao Chen's group of 4 could be said to have done their best. Of course, the ones they should thank the most were Chunling and Long Qing. After all, the 2 of them had given up an excellent cultivation opportunity to help Xiao Chen. Chunling and Long Qing didn't have the slightest advantage in doing so, but the 2 of them didn't complain at all. The 3 of them were siblings, and since Xiao Chen had spoken, they naturally had no reason to refuse. It was finally time to break through. It wasn't just Xiao Chen. A wisp of a smile appeared on the corners of Tianyu's, Chunling's, and Long Qing's mouths. Another day passed. At this moment, the fluctuations of spirit energy on their bodies grew more and more intense. In the end, accompanied by a terrifying storm of spirit energy, their cultivations finally broke through the limits of the Tao Emperor realm and arrived at the Tao Emperor realm. Along with their breakthroughs, the spirit energy in the surroundings madly converged towards them. Black Demon Mountain was a secret realm with extremely dense spirit energy, so there was no need to worry about the spirit energy here being insufficient for their breakthroughs. However, in less than 2 hours of time, their auras had quickly stabilized, and they were fixed at the threshold of the Tao Emperor realm. Their cultivations had successfully broken through, and they opened their eyes with excitement. Especially Gu Lingyao, she couldn't help but look at Xiao Chen with the intention of saying something. However, before she could speak, Xiao Chen had interrupted her. "There are still 3 more days. Don't waste it and try your best to stabilize your cultivations." He didn't give them too much time to be happy because there were still 3 more days before the 1-month deadline. Xiao Chen intended for them to make the best use of these 3 days and utilize the dense spirit energy on Black Demon Mountain to directly stabilize their cultivations. Breaking through to a higher realm was different from breaking through to a higher realm. At the same time, it was obviously much more time-consuming to stabilize one's cultivation after breaking through to a higher realm. On the other hand, if they were able to utilize the assistance of Black Demon Mountain and successfully stabilize their cultivations during these 3 days, then it would obviously save a great deal of time. When they heard Xiao Chen, they didn't even have the time to feel happy before they started cultivating once more. On the other hand, Gu Lingyao even puckered her lips with displeasure, but she didn't say anything. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. After a month passed, all the disciples that had entered Black Demon Mountain and the Ghost Territory were forcefully teleported out. After leaving Black Demon Mountain for a month, Qin Shuru and the others' cultivations had already stabilized at the threshold of the Tao Emperor realm. On the other hand, after a month of bitter cultivation, Gu Lingyao was finally able to act coquettishly by Xiao Chen's side without the slightest scruple. After they left Black Demon Mountain, Gu Lingyao hung on to Xiao Chen and spoke incessantly. "Husband, Sister Shuru, Sister Baihua, and I have all successfully broken through to the Tao Emperor realm. Are there any rewards?" This little girl actually wants a reward after breaking through on her own. When he heard this, Xiao Chen said helplessly, "You broke through on your own, yet you still want others to reward you. I don't care. In any case, I broke through. Are you going to give it to me or not?" Gu Lingyao refused to comply. When he saw this, Xiao Chen smiled and rubbed the little girl's head helplessly. "All right, tell me what reward you want. Even if it's the moon in the sky, I'll pluck it down for you." "I don't want the moon. I want husband to take us out to play. You haven't taken us out to play in a long time. Moreover, there are many places in the North Star boundary that we haven't been to." Gu Lingyao pouted when she heard this. "Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 12:12. Gu Lingyao held Xiao Chen's hand and acted coquettishly. Previously, due to the tense situation in the North Star realm, everyone's nerves had been tense. Besides fighting, Gu Lingyao and the others had not gone anywhere else to play. At this moment, facing Gu Lingyao's coquettishness, Xiao Chen looked at Tianyue and Qin Shi. He also felt that it was a good thing to bring the girls to play in the North Star realm. According to what Chen Ling had said, since the 100-race war was about to break out, there was not much time left for peace. Furthermore, the North Star realm would no longer exist at that time. As such, they should take advantage of this opportunity to bring everyone to relax. In fact, Xiao Chen still felt a sense of self-blame. This self-blame came from the fact that Xiao Chen felt that he had not spent enough time with his family. Not only Tianyue and Qin Shi, but even Bai Ruyue and Xiao Qing were the same. That's right. If Xiao Chen wanted his family, he had to be powerful enough. In order to be powerful, he had to fight and fight. As such, he naturally did not have much time to spend with his family. However, this could not be considered an excuse. It could only be said that he was helpless. Therefore, as long as Xiao Chen had time, he would accompany his family and try his best to make up for this regret. Therefore, without much hesitation, Xiao Chen quickly agreed. "Okay, then let's go to various places in the North Star realm to play." He could not bear to reject Gu Lingyao's request. Of course, this was also what Qin Shi and the others were thinking. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Gu Lingyao was naturally so happy that she danced with joy. She jumped directly onto Xiao Chen and refused to get down. After confirming that they were going to the North Star domain, they did not waste any time. The next morning, Xiao Chen, Qin Shi made Tianyue, Qin Yao, Qin Luo, Fei Mei, Anlan, Bai Ruyue, Xiao Qing, Long Qing, Chen Ling, and even Chen Yu came. The girls, Chen Ling and Long Qing, had naturally received Xiao Chen's invitation, while Chen Yu and the others had volunteered to come after hearing the news. Xiao Chen naturally welcomed Chen Yu and the others who wanted to tag along. Immediately after, the group boarded a starship and began their journey. It was a rare opportunity for them to relax. According to the plan of Gu Lingyao, Tianyu, Qin Shi, and 100 Flower Fairy, they planned to tour the entire North Star realm. Every time they arrived at a continent, they would come down and tour it. With their current status, no one in the North Star realm dared to provoke them, so they had some leisure time. The only troublesome thing was the appearance of Tianyue, Qin Shi, and the other three ladies. Of course, there was also Qin Yao, Qin Luo, Fei Mei, and Anlan. Their beauty was also top-notch. Although they weren't as devastatingly beautiful as Qin Shi and the other three ladies, they were definitely enough to mesmerize everyone. The appearance of a group of beauties naturally attracted a lot of attention, especially beauties with such beauty that could cause the downfall of a country. Hence, almost everywhere they went, the girls could be said to be the absolute focus of attention. Regarding this, Xiao Chen was helpless. Chen Yu, on the other hand, was drinking and teasing him heartlessly. "Haha, junior brother Xiao, I think that in the North Star realm, when it comes to women, if you claim to be number 2, no one would dare to claim to be number 1. Chen Yu's words were not false. As Xiao Chen's reputation rose, Many people in the North Star realm knew that not only did Shao Chun have 4 beautiful wives, but even his 6 maids were top-notch beauties. Who knew how many people of the younger generation envied Shao Chun? However, Shao Chun did not care about this at all. At this time, when he heard Chen Yu's words, Shao Chun said in a displeased tone, "Senior brother Chen Yu, why? Are you envious? Let Tian Yu introduce 2 heavenly clan beauties to you." Haha, no need, no need. After hearing Shao Chen's words, Chen Yu, who had just taken a sip of wine, almost choked to death. In the end, he smiled embarrassedly. Everyone traveled around the North Star realm. In the blink of an eye, 2 years had passed. In these 2 years, everyone's footprints had practically covered every corner of the North Star realm. These 2 years could be said to be Shao Chen's happiest 2 years. There were no life and death battles, and he did not need to think too much. He just stayed with his family like this. Everyone traveled the mountains and rivers together and experienced the vastness of the world together. In fact, this kind of happiness had always been what Shao Chun pursued. However, Shao Chun understood that now was not the time to relax. For the sake of his family, he had to constantly become stronger. After 2 years of traveling, everyone finally took a big detour and returned to the sacred palace. After 2 years, the sacred palace had not changed much. However, the defensive formations had been completely completed by Quan Lan and the Mulan Sacred Hall. Today, the sacred palace could be said to be ready to face the 100 Races war at any time. After returning to the sacred palace, another month of peaceful days passed. It was also 1 month later that the upheaval that Chun Ling had mentioned finally arrived. At midnight, the continents of the North Star realm began to involuntarily gather together, as if they were being forcefully sucked over by some force. Being in the sacred palace, Shao Chun and the others naturally felt this change. Not long after, Shao Xing and the other 4 patriarchs gathered the 10 chosen, and saint sovereigns of the sacred palace in the sacred hall. What Chun Ling had said had happened. However, only Shao Xing and the other 4 patriarchs, as well as Shao Chen and a few others knew about it. The others did not know. At this time, Shao Xing and the other 4 patriarchs had gathered everyone in the sacred hall. It was obvious that they were going to announce this matter. Now that the upheaval had occurred, it proved that Chun Ling's words were not groundless or false. Soon, the sacred hall of the sacred palace, which was already late at night, was brightly lit. One by one, the experts of the sacred palace arrived. Everyone gathered in the hall. Shao Xing and the other 4 patriarchs sat on the main seat. After everyone had arrived, Randing said in a deep voice, "Did everyone feel the upheaval tonight?" Hearing Randing's words, everyone nodded in confusion. They could feel that the heavenly Chun continent was moving at an extremely fast speed. Furthermore, the heavenly Chun continent had already started to connect with the surrounding continent. The continents that should have been unrelated to each other had now merged into a new continent. This made everyone extremely confused. Seeing everyone nod, Randang continued, "The North Star realm, or rather this world, is about to undergo an upheaval. Today, I called everyone here to discuss this matter. Please collect, vote, recommend." Chapter 12-13. 2 years had passed since the destruction of the Night Ghost Pavilion and Demonic Sky Palace. In these 2 years, the Sacred Palace had developed steadily and its strength had improved a lot, especially Shao Xing and the other 3 patriarchs. Needless to say, Shao Xing had broken through to the initial stage of the quasi-saint realm 2 years ago. In these 2 years, Randang, Binglian, and Mengjie had also broken through to the initial stage of the quasi-saint realm. This was naturally great news for the Sacred Palace. But now, the 100 Race War had arrived. Soon, the 4 astral realms would merge with the central world, and the peaceful times would no longer exist. Shao Xing and the other 3 patriarchs had hidden this matter from everyone for 2 years. Now, they could no longer hide it, so Randang told everyone the truth. This was the first time they had heard about the 100-race war. As soon as Randang finished speaking, everyone except Xiao Chen, Chun Ling, and Long Qing were shocked. Randang and the other 3 patriarchs did not disturb everyone. This matter was indeed too sensational, so they had to give everyone some time to digest it. They did not rush them. After a long while, everyone spoke one after another. The 4 astral realms and the central world. Is the world we live in really so vast? I thought the North Star realm was big enough. Yes, it seems that we have always been frogs at the bottom of a well. The sacred venerables spoke one after another. They were all experts of the older generation, but they were still extremely shocked when faced with this reality. It was indeed difficult to accept. While everyone was talking, Xiaoxing on the high platform finally spoke. He waved his hand, and everyone quickly quieted down. At the same time, Xiaoxing said indifferently, "No one can stop the 100-race war. No one can stop the 100-race war. This is the will of the heavenly Tao. What we need to prepare now is how to safely integrate into the central world. You already know that the central world is not like the 4 great astral boundaries. There are great saint emperors there. There were many things that couldn't be changed or disobeyed. As such, the only thing the sacred palace could do was to protect itself to the greatest extent possible and allow the entire sacred palace to smoothly integrate into the central world. While the sacred palace was having a tense discussion, the 9 heavens, Myriad Beast Valley, Supreme Deity Sect, and Liwang Sect were the same. 2 years ago, the 4 great sects had paid a hefty price to obtain news of the 100-race war from the sacred palace. Although they were skeptical at that time, they naturally no longer had any doubts now that the situation had changed. The sudden change happened without any warning, leaving no time for anyone to react. In just one night, the countless scattered continents in the North Star realm had perfectly merged into one gigantic continent. Moreover, as all the continents in the North Star realm merged, the horizon of the North Star realm began to collapse. As the horizon collapsed, the space in the North Star realm began to distort. When ordinary people looked up at the sky, they could clearly see that the sky was like a towel that had been forcefully twisted by someone. The entire sky was distorted, and at the same time, cracks had already covered the entire sky. The sun and moon hung in the sky at the same time, and both were already showing signs of collapse. Even the sun and moon were about to collapse. The North Star realm was like the end of the world. The cultivators were still fine with the scene before them. After all, they were powerful and had a broader vision. However, the ordinary people without cultivation were already completely scared out of their wits. All of them hid in their homes in fear and constantly prayed to the so-called gods, hoping that the heavens would bless them. Unlike the panic and helplessness of ordinary people, the 5 great quasi-saint sects had already begun their most intense preparations. The defensive formations that they had spent 2 years drawing were all activated, and the important cities were protected. In particular, the 5 great quasi-saint sects were tightly protected by the defensive formations. Everything was going on in a tight schedule. Xiao Chun had just finished dealing with the matters at hand and was heading to the residence of Bai Ruiyue and Xiao Qing. The 2 elders were still calm. After all, they had been by Xiao Chen's side all these years. Although they were always protected by Xiao Chen, the 2 elders' vision had indeed improved a lot. Therefore, they were still able to remain calm in the face of such a situation. "Chen-er," Bai Ruiyue called out when she saw Xiao Chen walking over. At the same time, Xiao Qing, Tianyu, Qin Shuru, Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and the other girls all looked at Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen smiled faintly in the face of everyone's gaze. "Don't worry, it'll be fine." Xiao Chen gestured for everyone not to worry too much. Subsequently, he chatted with everyone for a while before leaving. As the first chosen of the sacred palace, there were many things that Xiao Chen still needed to deal with. He walked all the way to the square outside the sacred hall on the main peak of the sacred palace. Xiao Xing and the other patriarchs were all present, along with a group of Sacred Palace experts. Everyone had already done what they needed to do. Next, they could only deal with the situation as they saw fit. The sudden change caused the tens of billions of living beings in the various races of the North Star domain to be extremely alarmed. At the same time, the 5 quasi-saint sects announced the 100 races war to the public one day later. Of course, they only gave a simple introduction and didn't go into too much detail. The only reason he did this was to allow the living beings in the North Star realm to be prepared. Of course, once this news spread, it naturally caused a huge commotion throughout the North Star realm. However, the 5 great quasi-saint sects no longer had the time to care about the outside world's reaction. Given the current situation, they could only clean up the snow in front of their own doors. After the fusion, the incomparably huge continent of the North Star boundary approached the central world at a terrifying speed. For 3 consecutive days, the vast continent seemed to be experiencing an earthquake as the ground trembled continuously. In the face of such tremors, everyone knew that it was not an earthquake, but because the continent was currently moving at high speed. It was many times faster than the speed of a starship. While the North Star boundary was rapidly approaching the central world, the great sage of the various races in the central world were already prepared. In the main hall of a huge mansion in a vast city, a skinny old man with a yellowish complexion and a face full of wrinkles sat on a high throne. Below him, over a dozen human experts sat respectfully. The old man looked at the crowd and said indifferently, "You're right. You're right. You're right. You can start preparing. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendations." Chapter 12:14. Hearing the old man's words, the dozen or so human race experts all nodded respectfully. This was absolutely shocking. Not only was the old man a great sage emperor in this small hall, but there were also more than a dozen people below him. The weakest among them was a quasi-sage great venerate, and there were even 4 half-step great sages. This kind of strength was enough to easily sweep across the North Star world. However, this was only one of the human race clans in the central world. That's right, the old man and everyone present came from a large human race clan in the central world. For a large clan to possess such strength, it was clear how strong the central world was as a whole. No one knew what the elder meant by preparing to take action, but soon, all the experts in the hall had disappeared, leaving only the elder in the hall. At this moment, the elder let out a long sigh and said, "Let's go. Let's go. I hope the human race won't suffer too many casualties this time." Chun-Ling had said before that every time the 100 race war began, the first wave of danger was the most serious when the 4 astral realms and the central world merged. This was because the major forces of the 4 astral realms had just merged with the central world. Moreover, the 4 astral realms and the central world could not be compared at all. Therefore, if they were unlucky at this time, it was very likely that they would be completely wiped out. It was very important to know where the central world would merge. If they could enter the human race's territory as soon as they arrived, they would be safe. However, if they entered the territory of a foreign race as soon as they arrived, it could only be said that everything pointed to disaster. Time passed slowly. Half a month later, the North Star world and the Central world finally began to merge. The North Star world, which had already merged together, was directly separated and began to merge with the Central world. It was like 2 pieces of cloth being forced together. There was no pattern to this at all. Everything could only rely on luck. In the Sacred Palace, the sacred realm where the Sacred Palace was located was forcefully separated from the small world, forming a small new continent that began to merge with the central world. The speed of the fusion was very fast. In less than an hour, the ground left, and the land where the Holy Palace was located slowly fell to the central world. Then, the ground healed again, as if nothing had happened. They had finally arrived at the central world. They could clearly feel that the rich world energy of the central world was constantly surging towards them through the defensive array. He had never felt such a dense heaven and earth spirit chi. This was just an ordinary place in the central world, but the heaven and earth spirit chi was so dense that it was not inferior to an ordinary cultivation secret realm. What a rich spiritual energy of heaven and earth! Many disciples couldn't help but exclaim. However, compared to the shock of the numerous disciples, on the main peak of the sacred palace, Chun Ling's expression had become incomparably solemn. He glanced at the surrounding environment. Although Chun Ling had not returned to the central world for tens of thousands of years, he was still able to determine which race's territory this place belonged to. The central world was different from the four astral worlds. The continents of the four astral worlds were divided and scattered everywhere, but the central world only had one continent. It was huge, and hundreds of races lived together on it. It was precisely because the situation in the central world was different from the four astral worlds that the 100 races of the central world placed great importance on territory, and the division of territory was very clear. Moreover, due to the different habits and beliefs of the various races, not only were there differences in the construction of cities, but even the surrounding environment was fundamentally different. Just like now, just by looking at the surrounding environment, Chun Ling could already tell that this was not the territory of the human race, but the territory of the ghost race. The black dead would not appear in the human race's territory, but the surrounding area was densely packed with black dead wood. The black dead wood was a type of tree that was completely black and had a hard texture. However, in the entire central world, only the ghost race liked the black dead wood, and the other races hated it. The reason was very simple: the black dead would release a black mist for a period of time every year. This was why the other races did not like it, and could even be said to hate it. However, it was different for the ghost race. The ghost race was born to live in the darkness, so they naturally had an abnormal love for the black dead wood. Chun Ling's expression turned ugly when he actually landed in the ghost race's territory. At the same time, Xiao Chen also noticed the change in Chun Ling's expression and walked up to him and asked, "What's wrong? Looks like our luck isn't too good, we're very unlucky." Chun Ling did not hide and sighed. "We're not in the human race's territory?" Hearing this, Xiao Chen frowned slightly. Not only that, we just happened to land in the ghost race's territory, and the ghost race has the worst relationship with the human race." Chun Ling smiled bitterly. If it was any other race, it would be better, but there was no need to doubt the ghost race. As long as they knew that the ghost races, the great sage would definitely come immediately and destroy the sacred palace without the slightest hesitation, because the sacred palace was a faction of the human race. "I only hope that the human race's reinforcements can come quickly, or things will be troublesome," Chun Ling finally said. Soon, everyone knew that they were in the ghost race's territory, and for a time, a tense atmosphere began to rapidly spread among the upper echelons of the sacred palace. Once again gathered in the sacred palace, Shaoxing looked at the people below and said, "Everyone, now that the situation is clear, how should we deal with it? Ancestor, since we're in the ghost race's territory, can we leave first?" Hearing this, a saint venerate asked. But just as he finished speaking, Chun Ling shook his head and said, "That's impossible, the central world is already vast and boundless, and now that it has merged with the four great astral realms, it's even more unimaginable. It's impossible for us to escape from the ghost race's territory. Even if we travel at full speed, with the speed of a saint, it'll take at least half a month to leave the ghost race's territory, let alone the disciples below. The ghost race won't give us so much time." It was impossible to escape while the ghost race was not paying attention. Hearing this, everyone's expression became even more solemn. Seeing this, Chun Ling did not keep them in suspense and directly said, "There's only one way now, and that is to wait for reinforcements until the human race's great sage arrives. At that time, there will be a possibility of negotiation. Sacred Son Qinling, how are you so sure that the human race's great sage will definitely come to rescue us? Hearing this, a Saint Venerate asked. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 12:15. Qinling wanted to defend and wait for reinforcements, which was equivalent to placing all his hopes on the great sage of the human race. But what if the great sage of the human race did not come to his rescue? At that time, the sacred palace would really be finished. In response to this sacred master's question, the rest of the people also nodded slightly, and then looked at Qinling, waiting for his answer. Facing the crowd's gaze, Qinling smiled slightly and said, "The great sage of the human race will definitely come to the rescue when he receives the news. As for the reason, it's very simple, because we are of the same race." Qinling had absolute confidence that as long as the great sage of the human race received the news, he would definitely come, because the sacred palace was a human force, and not an ordinary force, but the only quasi-sage sect in the North Star realm founded by the human race. Such a force could not be ignored by the entire human race, so the great sage of the human race could not sit idly by. Seeing how certain Qinling was, everyone was still a little skeptical. However, Shaoxing, who was on the high platform, spoke up at this time. "Holy Son Qinling's words are reasonable. Now our only choice is to defend and wait for reinforcement." Everyone present had doubts about Qinling's words, but Shaoqin chose to believe Qinling. Since Shaoxing had spoken, the people present naturally did not dare to say anything more. After deciding to defend and wait for reinforcements, the next step was to prepare for defense. The first was naturally the defensive formation. To fight against the great sage, the formation was the only thing the sacred palace could rely on. Once the formation was broken, the sacred palace would no longer have the power to turn the situation around. After all, no one in the sacred palace could fight against the great sage, not even Shaoxing and the other three. All the resources of the sacred palace were allocated to the operation of the formation. At the same time, if the great sage of the ghost race attacked, Shaoxing and the other three would have to personally guard the formation, otherwise it would be difficult to resist the attack of the great sage of the ghost race. Preparations began densely. According to Qinling's estimation, the great sage of the ghost race would definitely arrive within 3 days. While the sacred palace was preparing for the upcoming battle, in a mountain range not far from here, there was a ghost race sect standing proudly. Moreover, this ghost race sect was a supreme saint sect. The great sage was presiding over it. It was the Ghost Emperor sect. At this time, in the main hall of the Ghost Emperor sect, more than 10 half-step great sages and quasi-sages sat respectfully. And great too. They had basically investigated the situation of the sacred palace. Although it was very superficial, there were no mistakes. It seemed that the Ghost Emperor's intelligence network was not simple. The quasi-sage sect of the human race from the North Star realm was not far from the Ghost Emperor sect. Hearing this, a cold light flashed in Ghost Emperor sect's eyes as he said indifferently, "Very well. Since the heavens have given us such a great gift, it would be a shame if we don't accept it." Just as Qinling said, the ghost race and the human race were the most disliked. The relationship between the two races had always been very tense. It could be said that they had always been in a hostile position. Now that the Ghost Emperor sect knew about the existence of the sacred palace, there was naturally nothing to say. They had to destroy it as soon as possible. Otherwise, the human race's great sages would definitely come to stop them when they heard the news. At that time, things would become more troublesome. After all, the human race's great sages would not give up on a quasi-sage sect. On that day, the figures of the Ghost Emperor sect flew into the sky, and then directly disappeared into the void, heading in the direction of the sacred palace. Because they wanted to destroy the sacred palace before the human race's great sages arrived, The Ghost Emperor sect did not send many people this time, only a few dozen people. However, these people were all experts. Among them, there were 2 half-step great sages, 8 quasi-saint great sages, and all of them were Saint Realm experts. Of course, in addition to these, there was also the Great Sage Emperor Sect's Great Sage, Ghost Emperor Sect's Great Sage. The experts traversed the void and quickly rushed to the location of the sacred palace. At night, the sky slowly darkened, and the bright moon climbed into the sky. The night was very beautiful, but at this time, no one in the sacred palace was in the mood to enjoy such a beautiful scenery. Everyone looked nervous, as if waiting for something. Xiao Chun and many other experts of the sacred palace had been sitting in the sacred palace, ready to deal with the arrival of the ghost race experts at any time. The night was very quiet, and as the night deepened, the surroundings became even more silent. It was in this silence that the first terrifying pressure finally descended. Feeling the appearance of this pressure, Xiao Xing, Xiao Qin, and other experts of the sacred palace, who originally had their eyes closed in the sacred palace, suddenly opened their eyes. At this time, Xiao Xing shouted coldly, "They're here. Everyone, let's go." They had been waiting for the arrival of the ghost race experts, and now, the time had finally come. As Xiao Xing's voice fell, the experts of the sacred palace flew out of the sacred palace and came to the main square. Through the array they looked at the sky above. At this time, spatial cracks appeared in the sky, and one by one, the ghost race experts walked out of the spatial cracks. These ghost race experts seemed to be casually standing in various places in the sky, firmly surrounding the entire sacred palace. At the same time, after these people appeared, 3 even larger spatial cracks appeared. Immediately, the 2 half-step great saints and sovereign Ghost Frost slowly walked out of the 3 spatial cracks. 2 half-step great sages stood respectfully on both sides of sovereign Ghost Frost. They were slightly behind to show their respect. Sovereign Ghost Frost came to the sky above the holy palace with a calm expression. He looked at the people on the main square and said with a natural expression, "4 quasi-saint great sovereigns. As expected of a quasi-saint sect, you have a protective array. It seems that you have been prepared for this for a long time, but do you think this array alone can save you?" As soon as he spoke, Sovereign Ghost Frost did not say anything like surrendering and sparing their lives, because it was simply impossible. Given the relationship between the ghost race and the human race, it was simply impossible. Therefore, Sovereign Ghost Frost could not be bothered to say any more nonsense. Moreover, in his opinion, although the sacred palace was prepared, this array alone was not enough to stop him. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 12:16. A Great Saint. This was a living great saint. A solemn look flashed across the eyes of the sacred palace experts when they heard Sovereign Ghost Frost's words. This was the first time they had seen the great sage with their own eyes. Although Sovereign Ghost Frost did not release the slightest bit of aura, nor did he exude any so-called pressure, Sovereign Ghost Frost simply stood there and calmly spoke a few words. Everyone present could not help but feel fear. Simply put, Sovereign Ghost Frost's words were like the law. If he said that he wanted the sacred palace to be destroyed, then the sacred palace must be destroyed. It was a simple sentence, but it was like an imperial edict that no one could resist. Even Xiao Xing and the other 3, who were quasi-saints, seemed so insignificant in front of Sovereign Ghost Frost. It was also because there was a layer of array separating them. Otherwise, the ordinary disciples of the sacred palace would have been scared out of their wits by Sovereign Ghost Frost. What a joke! How could these disciples resist Sovereign Ghost Frost's pressure? Sovereign Ghost Frost did not wait for the crowd to respond. Perhaps from the beginning, he did not intend to listen to the sacred palace's response. The reason was very simple. Who would listen to a group of people who were about to die? He gently pointed his finger. As Sovereign Ghost Frost continued to descend, a black finger light instantly streaked across the sky. It was silent and did not have any terrifying power. However, wherever the black finger light passed, the space began to collapse inch by inch. Along the way, as the black finger light flew past, a long spatial crack appeared in the air behind it, as if it had been torn apart. With a casual point of his finger, he could easily tear the space apart. Finally, under everyone's gaze, the black finger light bombarded the array. There was still no earth-shattering aftermath. It was a very strange collision, but everyone found that when the black finger light hit the array seemed to have been forcibly dissolved by something in an instant. He broke it with a single blow? Someone from the sacred palace exclaimed in disbelief upon seeing this. It had taken 2 years and countless resources of the sacred palace to build this array, but now it could not even withstand a single blow from Sovereign Ghost Frost? Many sacred palace disciples revealed looks of horror on their faces. Indeed, if it was an ordinary saint-level array, it would definitely not be able to stop a great sage like Emperor Ghost Frost. As Emperor Ghost Frost himself said, it was indeed too whimsical for a saint-level array to stop him. With Sovereign Ghost Frost's eyesight, he could naturally tell the level of the sacred palace's talisman array at a glance. Therefore, from the very beginning, Sovereign Ghost Frost was full of confidence. However, it was a pity that the talisman matrix protecting the Holy Palace was not an ordinary saint-level talisman matrix. It was a talisman matrix from ancient times that Shao Chun had brought out from the secret realm of the Celestial Expanse sect. Moreover, it was the highest-level defensive talisman matrix. In order to inscribe this talisman array, all the talisman array masters in the sacred palace had given it their all. It wasn't just Quan Lan and her orchid sacred hall. Even some saint sovereigns who cultivated talisman arrays had given it their all. Therefore, the few saint-level talisman array masters did not show much nervousness or fear when they saw the black finger light cut open the array. Instead, they spoke confidently. If this formation is so easily broken, then wouldn't we have wasted the past 2 years of our lives? Following these people's words, the formation that had been rapidly collapsing suddenly began to recover rapidly. At the same time, the black finger light of Ghost Frost Sovereign was swallowed up in an instant. The talisman array inheritance of the Sky Expanse sect's secret domain could be said to be far beyond this era. It was a treasure that had been left behind since ancient times. As the highest-level defensive symbol array, it was called the Nine Suns Encirclement Array, which was also the array protecting the sacred palace at this moment. Unlike ordinary saint-level defensive symbol arrays, the Nine Suns Encirclement Array not only had terrifying defensive capabilities, but also had the ability to devour and self-heal. To put it simply, when the Nine Suns Encirclement Array was attacked, not only could it rapidly self-heal, but it could also devour the opponent's attack to support the operation of the array. With the ability to self-heal and devour, the Nine Suns Encirclement Array was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. It could not be compared to the commonly seen saint-level defensive symbols. He originally thought that a casual attack would be enough to break the Sacred Palace's defensive symbol array, but he did not expect the Nine Suns Encirclement Array to remain as stable as Mount Tai. In the face of such an outcome, Sovereign Ghost Frost's face turned grave. He stared intently at the Nine Suns Tajura formation. After a long while, a look of understanding flashed across his eyes. He then regained his composure and spoke in an indifferent tone. An ancient symbol array. Not bad indeed. Although this array is very strong, how long can it stop me? Sovereign Ghost Frost could easily break an ordinary defensive symbol array. Although the Nine Suns Encirclement Array was much stronger than an ordinary saint-level defensive symbol array, it was not unbreakable. The Nine Suns Encirclement Array could still be broken, but it would take some effort. Sovereign Ghost Frost ordered the Ghost Emperor sect experts around him. Attack this array with all your might. Sovereign Ghost Frost was not familiar with symbol arrays and had never studied them. Therefore, he could only break the array with brute force if he wanted to, unless he could find a symbol array master with a high cultivation base to help him. However, Sovereign Ghost Frost did not have such an idea. First of all, there were very few symbol array masters who had the ability to break the 9 suns encirclement array. Even in the central world, they were rare. It was undoubtedly a waste of time to find a symbol array master who could break the 9 suns encirclement array, so it was better to break it with brute force. Although it would take a lot of time to break it with brute force, it was obviously less than finding a symbol array master. As Sovereign Ghost Frost's voice faded, many experts of the Ghost Emperor sect attacked one after another, including the 2 half-step great saints. At this time, they also attacked the array without holding back. At the same time, the 9 suns encirclement array endured the attacks of dozens of half-step great saints, quasi-saints, and saints, but it was still as stable as Mount Tai. Everyone's attacks were constantly swallowed by the 9 suns encirclement array. At the same time, the damaged areas were also rapidly healing, showing no signs of collapse. Dozens of Ghost Emperor sect experts attacked with all their strength, but they still could not shake the 9 suns encirclement array in the slightest. Seeing this scene, many disciples of the Sacred Palace slowly breathed a sigh of relief. As long as the array was still there and had not been broken, there was still hope for the Sacred Palace. As long as they could hold on until the great saints of the human race arrived, there would be a turn for the better. Request collection, request monthly votes, request recommendation. Chapter 12:17. The only thing the Sacred Palace wanted to do now was to hold on for a while longer. The longer they held on, the greater their chances of survival. Sovereign Ghost Frost naturally knew what the Sacred Palace was thinking. At this time, he also began to attack. Dozens of Ghost Emperor sect experts attacked together, not to mention that there was a great saint sovereign. Various terrifying superpowers bombarded the array in the sky. At the same time, waves of powerful auras pressed down on the Sacred Palace disciples, making it difficult for them to breathe. Under such a violent attack, even the 9 suns encirclement array showed signs of exhaustion. Sensing that the 9 suns encirclement array was about to collapse, several saint sovereigns who were proficient in seal arrays came to Xiao Xing's group and said anxiously, "Ancestor, we have to act now." In the face of such an attack, Xiao Xing's group and the saint sovereigns of the Sacred Palace had to do their best to maintain the 9 suns encirclement array. The array must not be broken. It was the only capital the Sacred Palace had to contend against the Ghost Emperor sect. Without the array, the Sacred Palace would undoubtedly be defeated by the Ghost Emperor sect. Xiao Xing's group nodded solemnly without much hesitation. Subsequently, Xiao Xing's group and the Saint Sovereigns sat down cross-legged on the square. Soon after, terrifying auras shot out from everyone's bodies and quickly entered the 9 suns Tajura array. The principle behind what Xiao Xing's group was doing was very simple. It was nothing more than instilling all of their spiritual energy into the 9 suns encirclement array, allowing it to operate at full power. As everyone's spiritual energy poured in, sure enough, the array, which was already in a precarious state, quickly stabilized. With enough spiritual energy, the 9 suns encirclement array could operate at full power. When it operated at full power, the attacks of the Ghost Emperor sect experts could hardly threaten the 9 suns encirclement array. After all, although the Ghost Emperor sect's attacks were fierce, they could not destroy the 9 suns encirclement array in one fell swoop. As long as they could not destroy it in one fell swoop, the 9 suns encirclement array could quickly heal itself and ensure that the array would not break. With the addition of Xiao Xing and the other 3, as well as a group of Sage Realm Holy Venerables, a delicate balance was formed between the two sides. The Ghost Emperor sect was unable to break through the formation in one go, and for a time, both sides entered into a deadlock. Seeing that the formation had stabilized again, Sovereign Ghost Frost's face darkened. You're courting death. This sovereign wants to see how long you can hold on. In terms of strength, the Ghost Emperor sect had an overwhelming advantage. However, because of the formation, the Ghost Emperor sect couldn't do anything to the Saint Palace for a while. If it was just an ordinary Saint-level array, the Sacred Palace would definitely not be able to hold on for too long. Even if Shao Xing and the others attacked, with the strength of the Ghost Emperor sect, it would be destroyed in an instant. But now, the Nine Sons Tajura formation not only had Shao Xing and the others personally guarding it, but it also had the ability to self-heal and devour. While devouring a portion of the Ghost Emperor sect's attacks, it also had the support of the spiritual energy of Shao Xing and the others. Therefore, the power of both sides formed a delicate balance. Now, it was a matter of whose spiritual energy was depleted first. Without the slightest intention of stopping, the Ghost Emperor sect's experts continued to attack the formation. Facing the attacks of the Ghost Emperor sect's experts, the Sacred Palace's side also struggled to hold on. Time passed by minute, and at this moment, the final outcome depended on when the human race's great sage would arrive. The Ghost Emperor sect moved out, and the Sacred Palace resisted with all their might. Just as both sides were entangled on a misty immortal mountain in the human race's territory. At the top of the mountain, surrounded by white clouds, a bamboo house stood tall. Outside the bamboo house, an old man with half-black and half-white hair and a ruddy complexion sat cross-legged. A short table was placed in front of him, and wisps of fragrance slowly rose from the table. The old man's appearance was very strange, especially his half-black and half-white hair. It was very suitable for people to remember him at a glance. The old man's name was Enyangzi, and he was one of the human race's three great sages. The human race forces in the entire central world could be generally divided into three camps, which were respectively led by the three great sage forces. The three great sage forces, the great sage. These were the so-called three masters of the human race. Enyangzi was one of the three masters of the human race, the ancestor of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. At this moment, a lifeless old man appeared in front of Enyangzi, who had his eyes closed, without any warning. It was obvious that he didn't have long to live. The old man looked very old, but those who were familiar with him would know that he was actually younger than Enyangzi. However, he was Enyangzi's servant and had always served Enyangzi when he was young. Now, although the old man was still Enyangzi's old servant, his cultivation had reached the half-step great sage realm. In the entire heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, no one dared to underestimate this old man. Enyangzi slowly opened his eyes when the old man appeared. At the same time, the old man said in a hoarse voice, "There's news that the Ghost Emperor sect has already made their move." "Is there no movement from the Xianyuan clan?" Enyangzi wasn't surprised at all. In such a special time of death, the great sage forces of the various clans had activated their intelligence network to the extreme. They would immediately know of any movement. Therefore, Enyangzi received the news as soon as the Sacred Palace arrived in the Ghost race's territory. However, among the three masters of the human race, the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect was the furthest from the Ghost race's territory, and the closest was the Xianyuan clan. Therefore, Enyangzi believed that the Xianyuan clan would go to rescue the Sacred Palace. The Xianyuan clan was another great sage force of the Central World's three masters of the human race. Unlike the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, the Xianyuan clan was a clan, an ancient and powerful clan with an extremely long heritage. Its strength couldn't be underestimated. In response to Enyangzi's question, the old servant shook his head slightly. The Xianyuan clan didn't go to the Ghost race's territory. Instead, they went to the God race's territory to rescue another human force. The Xianyuan clan didn't go to the Ghost race's territory to rescue the Sacred Palace, but went to the God race's territory to rescue another human force. Yin Yangzi smiled faintly. That old bastard Xian Yuan still hasn't changed. He always picks the soft persimmons to pinch. Forget it, let me make the trip. I hope I can make it in time. With that, Yin Yangzi disappeared from where he stood. At the same time, an ethereal voice rang out from the void. It was an indifferent voice. I'll go first. Hurry over as soon as possible. The voice clearly came from Yin Yangzi. In order to arrive as soon as possible, Yin Yangzi took the lead and had the old servant lead the experts of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect to come later. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 12-18. Yin Yangzi set off for the Ghost Race's territory. At the same time, less than 100 breaths after Yin Yangzi's departure, several figures rose into the air from the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin. The experts of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin tore through the void above misty Immortal Mountain, causing spatial cracks to appear in the sky. Several dozen spatial cracks appeared at the same time, creating an extremely spectacular sight. The disciples of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin began to discuss with each other in puzzlement when they saw so many experts of their sect had set off. Just the quasi-saint experts alone numbered close to 20. What's going on? What's happened? Something big must have happened for so many powerful individuals to be mobilized. As the disciples discussed among themselves, someone quickly revealed the truth. You still don't know? I heard that a human quasi-saint sect is trapped in the Ghost Race's territory. The ancestor sovereign personally led people to rescue them. The experts of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin had set off together just to rescue the sacred palace. Some disciples were still puzzled. The Ghost Race's territory? Isn't that closer to the Xianyuan clan? Why do we have to go rescue them? The human quasi-saint sect that had appeared in the Ghost Race's territory should have been rescued by the Xianyuan clan. However, the Xianyuan clan hadn't gone to the Ghost Race's territory. On the contrary, the Xianyuan clan had gone to the God Race's territory. Yin Yangzi and the experts of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin knew why the Xianyuan clan hadn't gone to the Sacred Palace's territory and had instead gone to the God Race's territory to rescue a human quasi-saint sect instead. Just as Yin Yangzi had said, the Xianyuan clan was like an old woman picking persimmons, picking the weakest ones to pinch. They were well aware of the relationship between the human race and the ghost race. A great battle was unavoidable if the Xianyuan clan had gone to the Ghost Race's territory to rescue the Sacred Palace. However, things would have been much easier if the God Race had gone to the God Race's territory. After all, the relationship between the God Race and the human race wasn't too bad at the moment. The Xianyuan clan didn't want to fight the Ghost Race to the death right from the start, so he'd directly given up on the Sacred Palace and turned to rescue a human quasi-saint sect instead. Many human forces in the Central World were well aware of the Xianyuan clan's way of doing things. Therefore, they were not too surprised even though they despised it. The Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect was already rushing towards the Ghost Clan's territory. In order to arrive as soon as possible, the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect didn't send many people, only a few dozen. However, these people were the same as the Ghost Emperor sect. The lowest cultivation level was at the Saint Realm. He didn't know what was going on in the Heavenly Yin and Solar sect. At this moment, the conflict between the Sacred Palace and the Ghost Emperor sect had reached its climax. Several days passed, but the 9 Suns Tajura formation protecting the Sacred Palace remained intact despite the efforts of Shao Xing and the others. This was something to be happy about, but there wasn't the slightest trace of joy on the faces of the Sacred Palace disciples. This was because Shao Xing and the others had consumed a great deal of their spiritual energy over the past few days. At this moment, Shao Xing and the others' faces had all turned a little pale. Shao Xing and the other 3 were fine. After all, the 4 of them were quasi-sage great venerables. However, the situation of the other saint venerables was not so good. After persisting for several days without rest, the Saint Venerable's faces were already pale. The Saint Sovereigns were about to run out of spiritual energy. Sovereign Ghost Frost also noticed this, and a cold smile flashed through his eyes. The sacred palace couldn't hold on for much longer. Several days had passed, but the human great saint still hadn't appeared. Logically speaking, given the distance between the Xianyuan clan and the sacred palace, he should have arrived long ago if he wanted to rescue the sacred palace. However, the fact that the Xianyuan clan's experts still hadn't appeared meant that the Xianyuan clan had clearly given up on the sacred palace. The Xianyuan clan's absence was undoubtedly good news for Sovereign Ghost Frost. This way, the Ghost Emperor Sect's experts would have enough time to break the formation. The Xianyuan clan is still the same as before. Ridiculous. Sovereign Ghost Frost couldn't help but feel disdain in his heart. He could guess why the Xianyuan clan had given up on the sacred palace. To put it bluntly, the Xianyuan clan didn't want to stand out and wanted to preserve their strength. They didn't want to fight to the death with the Ghost Emperor sect. It seemed that the Xianyuan clan didn't lose anything by doing this, but in fact it was extremely stupid. The 100-race war was about to begin, but the Xianyuan clan was still plotting his own scheme. He only focused on himself and not the entire human race. It was simply extremely narrow-minded. Of course, the Xianyuan clan's narrow-mindedness was a good thing for the ghost race. It was also something that Sovereign Ghost Frost was happy to see. Old bastard Xianyuan, you're already so old but you're still so stupid. Fine, I have to thank your Xianyuan clan for this. Otherwise, how could I have destroyed a quasi-saint sect of your human race so easily? Laughing coldly in his heart, Sovereign Ghost Frost gave the order to attack again, not giving the sacred palace the slightest chance to breathe. It was obvious that the sacred palace was an arrow at the end of its flight. As time passed, the sacred palace's saint sovereigns found it increasingly difficult to hold on. There were several times when the formation began to show signs of collapse. The situation was getting worse. If this continued, the formation would definitely collapse. Shao Chun and the other chosen stood on the main square. Seeing the increasingly dangerous situation, a glint of determination flashed across their eyes. Shao Chun said in a clear voice, "Brothers, life and death is at this moment. As disciples of the sacred palace, we should also contribute our strength." In the current situation, it was obviously difficult to rely on Shao Xing's group of 4 and the Saint Sovereigns alone. Therefore, Shao Chen mobilized all the disciples of the sacred palace to work together to ensure the operation of the formation. This was the last resort. Although the strength of the disciples was far inferior to Shao Xing's group and could be said to be very weak, there were many of them. If everyone contributed their strength, they could at least hold on a little longer. As Shao Chen's voice rang out, the many disciples, deacons, and elders who were still in a daze recovered from their shock. A look of determination flashed across their eyes. Immediately, Shao Chen took the lead and sat down. His spiritual energy soared into the sky and instantly sank into the formation. Following Shao Chen's action, Long Qing, Chen Yu, Emperor Qing, Bai Yi, and the others did the same. Under the leadership of the chosen and saintesses, the other disciples of the sacred palace followed suit. For a time, streams of spiritual energy, thick and thin, entered the formation without exception. With so much spiritual energy once again converging into the formation, the 9 suns encirclement formation, which had been on the verge of collapse, became stable again. However, Sovereign Ghost Frost was completely unconcerned. Trapped beasts are putting up a desperate fight. Do you think you can overturn the heavens with the strength of ants? Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 12:19. The addition of the Sacred Palace disciples did gradually stabilize the 9 suns encirclement formation, but Sovereign Ghost Frost was not worried at all because all of this was only temporary. In order to stabilize the 9 suns encirclement formation and prevent it from collapsing, there must be a huge amount of spirit chi supporting it at all times. Even the saint sovereigns of the sacred palace would find it difficult to withstand such spirit chi, let alone these disciples with low cultivation. Although there were many disciples, their cultivation was too low after all. For a short period of time, they could indeed rely on the advantage of numbers to forcibly maintain the 9 suns encirclement formation, but after a long time, it was obvious that some of them would not be able to withstand it. At that time, the 9 suns encirclement formation would undoubtedly collapse. A trace of contempt flashed in their eyes, but the experts of the Ghost Emperor sect still did not stop attacking. At the same time, Chun Ling did not sit down cross-legged like Shao Chun and the others, but looked at the sky with a complicated expression. The Xianyuan clan still hasn't changed at all. Chun Ling naturally knew that among the 3 masters of the human race, the Xianyuan clan was the closest to the ghost race's territory, but until now, the Xianyuan clan had not appeared. The answer was self-evident. Just like many years ago, the Xianyuan clan was only thinking about their own clan and how to protect themselves, so they were unwilling to fight to the death with the Ghost Emperor sect. In Chun Ling's opinion, the Xianyuan clan's choice was both within the plan and unexpected. After all, so many years had passed, and he thought that the Xianyuan clan would have changed, but who would have thought that it was still the same? It was impossible to rely on the Xianyuan clan, so now they could only pin their hopes on others. The Xianyuan clan was unwilling to rescue the sacred palace, but Chun Ling was still confident that the other 2 of the 3 masters of the human race would take action. After all, the sacred palace was the human race's quasi-saint sect, but he did not know if they could make it in time. Judging from the current situation, although Shao Chun had mobilized everyone in the Holy Palace, they could only hold on for another 2 days at most. By that time, those ordinary disciples with low cultivation would have exhausted their spiritual power. At that time, it would not be so easy to maintain the spirit array to contend with the experts of the Ghost Emperor sect. The situation was becoming more and more dangerous, but it was obviously impossible and unrealistic to rely on the sacred palace's own strength to contend against the Ghost Emperor sect. The difference in strength between the 2 sides was too great, and they were not on the same level. Therefore, the sacred palace could only place their hopes on the great sage of the human race. They could only hope that the great sage of the human race would arrive as soon as possible. There were no absolutes in this world, not to mention in a chaotic world like the 100-race war. Every step was fraught with danger, especially for an external force like the sacred palace. It could be said that in almost every 100-race war, foreign forces like the sacred palace would be directly destroyed by the supreme saint sects of the central world. In addition, the sacred palace's luck was really bad this time. They had actually landed in the ghost race's territory, which could be said to be the worst possible situation. Fortunately, the sacred palace had made preparations in advance and set up the 9 suns encirclement formation. Otherwise, the sacred palace would have been razed to the ground. As he thought to himself, Chun Ling also sat down. Just like Shao Chun and the others, he continuously sent his spirit energy into the formation. It would be good if they could hold on a little longer. As for the rest, they could only leave it to the heavens to see if the sacred palace was truly fated to perish. The attack did not stop for a moment. In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. Just as Sovereign Ghost Frost had thought, after 2 days, most of the disciples of the sacred palace had begun to show signs of exhaustion. These disciples were all ordinary disciples of the sacred palace. Their talent was not too high and their cultivation was relatively weak. They were only able to hold on for 2 days with the help of elixirs. Now they had finished eating the elixirs and the spirit energy in their bodies was almost depleted. The faces of the disciples were pale. Although they still clenched their teeth and persevered, the spirit energy in their bodies that was injected into the formation was becoming less and less. The supply of spirit energy slowly slowed down. As a result, the formation naturally became shaky again. Seeing this scene, Sovereign Ghost Frost sneered. Trapped beasts are fighting. What other tricks do you have now? In order to deal with the sacred palace, the Ghost Emperor sect had indeed put in a lot of effort. However, although there were some twists and turns in the process, the result did not change. At least in Sovereign Ghost Frost's opinion. Now that the sacred palace's 9 suns encirclement formation was about to reach its limit, as long as the formation was broken, it would be easy to take down the sacred palace. In addition, everyone in the sacred palace was exhausted and their spirit energy was depleted. As a result, without the protection of the formation, they were no different from lambs waiting to be slaughtered. At the same time, Xiao Chen also felt the changes in the formation. At this time, his face was also pale. He slowly opened his eyes and glanced around at the many disciples who had begun to faint. A trace of helplessness flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes. To be able to endure for 2 days without sleep and rest was already an extremely difficult task for these ordinary disciples. Still not here. He thought to himself. The sacred palace could be said to be a lamp that had run out of oil. However, in the end, they still did not wait for the arrival of the human race's great saint. While thinking to himself, Xiao Chen's gaze also turned to Sovereign Ghost Frost in the sky. Just like at the beginning, Sovereign Ghost Frost still looked indifferent, as if he did not take the sacred palace seriously from beginning to end. At most, they could hold on for half a day. After half a day, the formation would be broken. More and more disciples fainted. At this time, even Xiao Sheng and the other 3 could not help but open their eyes. A trace of helplessness and unwillingness flashed in their eyes. They had just arrived in the central world. Were they going to be destroyed just like that? In the North Star boundary, the sacred palace could be said to be the top force, but they had just arrived in the central world. In front of a supreme saint sect, they were so powerless. They did not even have the strength to resist. Looking at the dozens of figures of the Ghost Emperor sect in the sky, there was no way to fight this battle. Not to mention Sovereign Ghost Frost, a supreme saint, even the 2 half-step great saints were not people the sacred palace could contend with. Not to mention, there were more than a dozen quasi-saint great venerables around them. This was the disparity in strength. While Xiao Sheng and the other 3 were silent, cracks appeared in the formation. This was a sign that it was about to collapse. Seeing this scene, the Ghost Emperor sect's experts sneered, while the sacred palace's people were silent. They still could not hold on. Perhaps the sacred palace could only go this far. But at this moment, just as the Ghost Emperor sect's experts were about to destroy the 9 suns encirclement formation, no one saw that an old man in white linen clothes had appeared in the sky. The old man was very unique, especially his half-black and half-white hair, which was particularly eye-catching. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. If you want to talk about Sword Master of 8 Desolations with more like-minded people, follow excellent literature on WeChat. Talk about life, find confidence. Chapter 12:20. His half-black and half-white hair fluttered in the wind. This old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion was none other than Yangzi, one of the 3 great saints of the human race. With the great sage's cultivation base, Yangzi rushed all the way from the Tianyin and Taiyang sects and finally managed to catch up at the last moment. Seeing Yangzi's appearance, the people of the sacred palace naturally did not know his identity. However, Chen Ling knew that he had seen Yangzi before. At this moment, Chen Ling's face also showed a smile. Since Yangzi had arrived, it meant that things had taken a turn for the better. At least, the great saints of the human race had not completely abandoned the sacred palace. Countless pairs of eyes stared at Yangzi in the sky. At the same time, Sovereign Ghost Frost also looked at Yangzi and said with an unfriendly expression, "Yangzi, are you here to die?" The ghost race and the human race had never dealt with each other, so when the great saints of the two races met, the smell of gunpowder was naturally full of tension. In addition, the 9 suns encirclement formation was about to be broken, but Inyangzi's appearance at this time made Sovereign Ghost Frost even more furious. However, in the face of Sovereign Ghost Frost's cold shout, Inyangzi completely ignored it. He looked down at the sacred palace and a smile appeared on Inyangzi's face. Ancient talisman formation. Not bad. Without this formation, this old man may not have made it in time. Along the way, Inyangzi himself thought that the sacred palace might not be able to hold on. After all, the Tianyin and Taiyang sects were very far from the ghost race's territory. Even if Inyangzi rushed at full speed, it would still take several days. Such a long time was enough for the Ghost Emperor sect to slaughter the sacred palace. Without the protection of the formation, the sacred palace would indeed have been destroyed. However, things were different now that they had the formation. The sacred palace had persevered. Although they were in imminent danger, they had managed to hold on until Inyangzi arrived. Moreover, the sacred palace had not lost a single soldier, which was the most important thing. It was only in this way that Inyangzi's rescue would be meaningful. After all, by the time Inyangzi arrived, less than a tenth of the sacred palace's experts would be left. Even if the sacred palace was saved, it would be meaningless. After all, there weren't many experts left in the sacred palace. But it was different now. The sacred palace didn't lose anything. A well-preserved quasi-sage sect would undoubtedly be of great help to the human race. Inyangzi was very satisfied with the sacred palace's performance. He would leave the rest to the heavenly Yin solar sect. Inyangzi glanced indifferently at the sacred palace below, and then unhurriedly shifted his gaze to Sovereign Gui Shuang with a smile on his face. I say, old ghost, be wise and retreat. With this old man here, you can't touch them. Inyangzi and Sovereign Gui Shuang were both great saint emperors, so the two of them were naturally evenly matched. Therefore, Inyangzi directly told Sovereign Gui Shuang to retreat as soon as he spoke. Sovereign Gui Shuang's face darkened when he heard Inyangzi's words. Inyangzi, don't be too self-righteous. So what if you're here? This old man will destroy this sect in front of you today. Let's see what you can do. Inyangzi had only appeared alone. Sovereign Gui Shuang wasn't stupid. Calculating the distance between the heavenly Yin solar sect and the ghost race's territory, Inyangzi should be able to arrive in just a few days. This meant that Inyangzi was one step ahead. As for the other experts of the heavenly Yin solar sect, they should still be on their way. Since the other experts of the heavenly Yin solar sect were still on their way, Sovereign Gui Shuang had nothing to fear. Although Inyangzi was the great sage, Sovereign Gui Shuang could hold him back. In this way, the other experts of the Ghost Emperor sect would still have a chance to destroy the sacred palace if they continued to attack the array. With a plan in mind, Sovereign Gui Shuang shouted in a deep voice, "Continue attacking." After ordering the other experts of the Ghost Emperor sect to continue attacking the array, Sovereign Gui Shuang directly attacked Inyangzi. It wasn't that Sovereign Gui Shuang didn't think of joining forces to kill Inyangzi, who had arrived alone. After all, there were dozens of experts of the Ghost Emperor sect present, while Inyangzi was alone. However, this thought only flashed through Sovereign Gui Shuang's mind, and he quickly rejected it. This was because it was impossible to rely on the advantage of numbers to kill Inyangzi. If he couldn't defeat Inyangzi, he could easily retreat. At the great sage level, it was almost impossible to rely on the advantage of numbers to surround and kill a great sage. Only if there were no less than 50 quasi-sage great venerables would there be a slight chance. However, among the many experts of the Ghost Emperor sect present, there were only a dozen quasi-sage great venerables. It was obviously impossible to rely on a dozen people to kill Inyangzi. Of course, if another great sage from the Ghost clan came, there would be a great chance. It was possible for two great sages to kill one great sage under the premise of paying a certain price. After all, the great sage couldn't escape even if he wanted to. Unfortunately, Sovereign Gui Shuang was the only great sage from the Ghost Clan present, so he consciously gave up the idea of killing Yinyangzi. As long as he delayed Yinyangzi and allowed the other experts of the Ghost Emperor sect to continue attacking the array, there was still a chance to destroy the sacred palace in one fell swoop. Following Sovereign Gui Shuang's attack, the battle between the great sage immediately broke out in the sky. It was just a casual collision, but the space was completely torn apart. The ground below seemed to have completely changed its appearance, and a deep pit was blasted open in an instant. As the attack landed, the terrifying shock waves from their battle spread out in all directions. However, the shock waves quickly dissipated. At the same time, a layer of invisible restriction erupted around the two of them, as if it had peeled off the entire sky. This was the power of space. The great sage had already mastered the power of space. When the battle broke out between them, the power of space would imprison the space. This way, the battle between the great sage wouldn't cause too much of an impact to the world. Moreover, after the imprisonment of the power of space, the entire space would become more solid and wouldn't be easily shattered. It was different from the battle between quasi-sages and saints. The battle between the great sage would no longer enter the void, because even in the void, it was difficult to withstand the powerful power of the great sage. Therefore, directly imprisoning the space was the great sage's battle method. Once the space was imprisoned, no one below the great sage realm could break it, let alone stop it. Two incomparably terrifying auras soared into the sky from Yinyangzi and Sovereign Gui Shuang's bodies. At the same time, Yinyangzi's eyes turned black and white. Yinyang eyes. Good. Today, let this emperor see how capable your Yinyang eyes are. Sovereign Gui Shuang laughed heartily as he looked at Yinyangzi's black and white eyes. Begging to be collected, begging to be recommended. Chapter 12:21. The Yinyang eye was a special physique that was said to be able to see through all illusions in the world. In the central world, no one dared to underestimate Yinyangzi's Yinyang eye. Even the great sage did not dare to lower his guard in the slightest when facing the Yinyang eye. Therefore, even though Sovereign Ghost Frost appeared to be full of fighting spirit, in fact, he was still extremely fearful and did not dare to be careless in the slightest. On the other hand, Yinyangzi's smile did not diminish when he heard Sovereign Ghost Frost's words. I also want to see if your extreme ghost net has improved. Hearing Yinyangzi's words, Sovereign Ghost Frost coldly snorted and immediately struck out with his palm. Seeing this, Yinyangzi unhurriedly pointed his finger at the weakest point of the ghost claw at a tricky angle. This was the terror of the Yinyang eye. Whether it was a martial skill or a divine ability, the Yinyang eye could easily see the weakest point, or rather, the flaw. This way, one could neutralize the opponent's attack with the smallest price. As his finger fell, Yinyangzi said indifferently at the same time, "You all just need to guard the array." Yinyangzi said these words to the Sacred Palace group. Now that Yinyangzi was entangled with Sovereign Ghost Frost, he could not free himself to deal with the other experts of the Ghost Emperor sect. However, without Sovereign Ghost Frost, the pressure on the Sacred Palace was obviously reduced by a lot, and the Nine Suns encirclement formation was much easier to deal with. Therefore, Yinyangzi asked everyone to guard the array. As long as the array was not broken, there was nothing to worry about when the experts of the Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect arrived. Hearing Yinyangzi's words, the Sacred Palace group naturally understood the meaning behind his words. Originally exhausted, they all took their last breath. Yinyangzi's arrival gave everyone hope. For a time, the Sacred Palace and the Ghost Emperor sect were in a stalemate. Without Emperor Gui Shuang, the attacks of the Ghost Emperor sect's experts were indeed much weaker. This was indeed good news for the Sacred Palace. The weakening of the attacks meant that the 9 suns encirclement formation required less spiritual energy. As a result, the pressure on the Sacred Palace experts would naturally be reduced. Sovereign Gui Shuang and Yinyangzi were engaged in a fierce battle, while the Sacred Palace and the Ghost Emperor sect were in a deadlock. For a time, the battle seemed to have entered a stalemate. However, the Sacred Palace was actually more willing to see such a stalemate, because as long as the stalemate continued, the experts of the Heavenly Yin and Solar sect would arrive. At that time, the situation would gradually shift in the Sacred Palace's favor. The Sacred Palace and Yinyangzi weren't in a hurry, but the Ghost Monarch sect couldn't. They had to destroy this formation before the people of the Heavenly Yin and Solar sect arrived, and then destroy the Sacred Palace. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a chance. In the face of a mere quasi-sage sect, the experts of the Ghost Emperor sect had persisted for nearly 10 days without being able to take it down. This naturally made the experts of the Ghost Emperor sect depressed. However, there was no other way. This 9 suns encirclement formation, which was passed down from ancient times, was indeed too difficult to deal with. There was no way to break it. Coupled with the appearance of Yinyangzi, the Ghost Emperor sect felt even more anxious. Originally, it was a simple matter for a supreme sage sect to destroy a quasi-sage sect. But who would have thought that this tiny quasi-sage sect would actually have such a turtle shell? It simply made the Ghost Emperor sect's experts unable to do anything. They didn't know where to start from to get rid of this tortoise shell. Just as the experts of the Ghost Emperor sect were extremely depressed, the Sacred Palace was also under great pressure. Everyone was already like a lamp that had run out of oil. At this time, they still had to grit their teeth and persevere. In fact, the Sacred Palace wasn't feeling good either. The two sides were in a stalemate. The battle between Sovereign Ghost Frost and Yinyangzi had no intention of determining a victor. Both of them were evenly matched. This was normal. After all, at the level of the Great Sage, who would be weaker than the other? At this level, one was already the strongest in this world. Talent no longer had any meaning among the Great Sage. After all, who could break through the Great Sage's level of talent be weak? Everyone was a genius, a monstrous genius. In this way, there was naturally no difference in talent. It was almost impossible to determine a victor. At least, it was impossible in a short period of time. After fighting for a long time, Sovereign Ghost Frost also became a little anxious. The longer the battle dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for the Ghost Emperor sect because the experts of the Heavenly Yin and Solar sect should be arriving soon. As if sensing the change in Sovereign Ghost Frost's form, Yinyangzi chuckled softly. "What's wrong? Old Ghost, are you panicking?" He naturally knew what Sovereign Ghost Frost was thinking. This was also Yinyangzi's intention. He would delay Sovereign Ghost Frost, while the Sacred Palace would use the array to block the many experts of the Ghost Emperor sect. As long as this stalemate continued, the situation would be completely different once the experts of the Heavenly Yin and Solar sect arrived. Hearing Yinyangzi's words, Sovereign Ghost Frost's face turned cold. He didn't answer, but he increased the intensity of his attack. This was the first time they had witnessed a battle between the Great Sage with their own eyes. It wasn't an exaggeration to describe it as earth-shattering. Unfortunately, Xiao Qin and the others weren't in the mood to enjoy such an earth-shattering battle. At this moment, everyone in the Sacred Palace was focused on maintaining the array. Time slowly passed. Half a day later, although the 9 suns encirclement array seemed to be on the verge of collapse, it still didn't collapse. It was like a small boat struggling to move forward in a storm. It seemed to be in danger of being destroyed at any time, but it still persevered. After a long time, there was no way to break the 9 suns encirclement array. At this moment, spatial cracks appeared in the sky. Needless to say, the experts of the Heavenly Yin and Solar sect had arrived. Dozens of spatial cracks slowly tore open in space. At the same time, experts in the heavenly Yin and solar sex robes strode out of the void. There were dozens of people in total, men and women, old and young. However, their strength was the same as the Ghost Emperor sect. The weakest among them was at the saint stage. Moreover, the heavenly Yin and solar sect had one more half-step great sage than the Ghost Emperor sect. In the end, they failed to break the array before the experts of the heavenly Yin and solar sect arrived. Now that the experts of the heavenly Yin and solar sect had appeared, it was obvious that the Ghost Emperor sect no longer had the chance to attack the sacred palace. With the appearance of the experts of the heavenly Yin and solar sect, the experts of the Ghost Emperor sect stopped their attacks and looked at the experts of the heavenly Yin and solar sect as if they were facing a great enemy. The experts of the Ghost Emperor sect could ignore and despise the sacred palace. However, the Ghost Emperor sect didn't dare to underestimate the heavenly Yin and solar sect because the other party was also a great sage sect. Their strength wasn't inferior to the Ghost Emperor sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 12:22. The experts of the two great sage sects faced each other. Both sides obviously knew each other. At the very least, they had fought before. Therefore, as soon as they saw each other, the experts of the heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect sneered. The difference in strength between the two sides wasn't great, but in terms of condition, the heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect was clearly in a better state, much better state. After all, the experts of the Ghost Emperor sect had been attacking the array with all their strength for so many days. Although they were much better off than the sacred palace, they definitely couldn't be considered in peak condition. Under the premise that everyone had consumed so much energy, if the Ghost Emperor sect were to fight with the heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect at this time, there would only be one result: a crushing defeat. After all, the weakest cultivator present had reached the saint stage. In this way, unless they fought to the death, it would be very difficult for them to die. Life and death were easy to say, but defeat could be said to be a certainty. In other words, the Ghost Emperor sect had no other way to deal with the sacred palace. After besieging for so long, they were going to return empty-handed in the end. They had mobilized so many experts, but now, let alone destroy the sacred palace, they couldn't even touch a hair of the sacred palace. This was unacceptable to the experts of the Ghost Emperor sect. They were depressed, but there was nothing they could do. At this time, Sovereign Ghost Frost and Yin Yangzi also stopped fighting and came to the front of their respective sections. Sovereign Ghost Frost glanced at the experts of the heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect and said with a gloomy face, "Yin Yangzi, do you think this can save your sect?" The angriest person was naturally none other than Heavenly Emperor Ancestor Gui Shuang. Even he had personally taken action, but in the end, he couldn't even touch a hair of Yi Shiwen. As a great saint emperor, how could Gui Shuang accept this? At this point, for Sovereign Ghost Frost, it was no longer important whether he could destroy the sacred palace or not. Even so, Sovereign Ghost Frost couldn't let Yin Yangzi have an easy time. A trace of coldness flashed in his heart. At the same time, Yin Yangzi also said with a chuckle, "What? Old ghost, you still want to fight? It's all right, I'll keep you company." Yin Yangzi was not afraid of Sovereign Gui Shuang and the Ghost Emperor sect. Hearing this, Sovereign Gui Shuang's face became gloomier and murderous intent filled his eyes. At the same time, he gritted his teeth and said, "Yin Yangzi, don't be happy too early." As Ghost Frost's sovereign spoke, a monstrous ghost chi soared into the sky from his body. At the same time, as the ghost chi spread, the space began to collapse inch by inch, like the bark of a tree that began to fall off. In an instant, a huge black hole appeared in the sky. At the same time, from the black hole, a terrifying void storm wantonly emerged. Upon sensing the void storm, Yin Yangzi's eyes glinted in surprise. "Old fogey, you're crazy. You actually triggered spatial turbulence. It had never occurred to him that Sovereign Ghost Frost would not hesitate to trigger spatial turbulence. This was simply insane. Spatial turbulence was a kind of spacetime disorder caused by spatial tremors. Once someone was sucked into it, they would either die in the void or be transported to any place in the world. Unexpectedly, Sovereign Ghost Frost did not hesitate to trigger spatial turbulence. Following Enyangzi's shout, Sovereign Ghost Frost sneered. "Enyangzi, you're delusional if you want to bring them back safely. I'd like to see how many people you can save." Triggering spatial turbulence was definitely something only a madman would do. Once someone triggered spatial turbulence, they would definitely be caught in it. Even a great sage or emperor would be injured if they were in the center of the spatial turbulence. It could be said that this was a move that would harm the enemy by 1,000. Therefore, under normal circumstances, no the great sage would be willing to use this move. However, the hatred in Sovereign Ghost Frost's heart was too strong. Even if he was injured, he would not let Enyangzi have an easy time. As soon as his voice fell, Sovereign Ghost Frost pushed his hands forward. Immediately, a wave-like void storm rushed madly towards the sacred palace. The 9 suns encirclement formation could withstand spiritual power attacks, but it could not withstand the void storm. At the same time, Sovereign Ghost Frost was naturally the first to be swallowed by the void storm. His face instantly turned pale. However, as the great sage, even if he was swallowed by the spatial turbulence, he was still as steady as Mount Tai. There was no sign of him being swept away. Although Sovereign Ghost Frost could resist the spatial turbulence, the many disciples of the sacred palace were in trouble. At this time, the spatial turbulence frantically passed through the 9 suns encirclement formation and rushed into the sacred palace. Many disciples of the sacred palace were quickly swept away by the spatial turbulence. Seeing this scene, Enyangzi did not have time to think. He immediately took action to stabilize the space. However, he was still too slow. After all, the spatial turbulence had already appeared. He could only do his best. The raging spatial turbulence continued to sweep away one sacred palace disciple after another. On the main square, Xiao Qin, Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls stood side by side. Feeling the raging spatial turbulence, Xiao Qin's face turned solemn. He could not help but say to the 4 girls beside him in a low voice, "Be careful." This was the first time Xiao Qin had seen the spatial turbulence. It was very terrifying. There was no way to resist it at all. Just as Xiao Qin's voice fell, a spatial turbulence rushed towards the main square. Seeing this, Xiao Xing and the other 3 did not hesitate. They immediately took action to protect Xiao Qin and the others. In the face of the spatial turbulence, there was basically no resistance under the Saint Realm. Fortunately, with the help of Xiao Xing and the other 3, Xiao Qin and the others were not in danger. They originally thought that the crisis was over, but no one expected Tian Yu to be swept into the spatial turbulence. As the first holy maiden, Tian Yu's strength was not weaker than Xiao Qin's. However, in the face of the spatial turbulence, she still had no power to resist. Seeing that Tian Yu was about to be swept away by the spatial turbulence, Xiao Qin instinctively reached out and grabbed Tian Yu. But the result was obvious. The 2 were swept away by the spatial turbulence almost instantaneously. By the time everyone regained their senses, Xiao Qin and Tian Yu's figures were nowhere to be seen. Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls' expressions changed drastically when they saw Xiao Qin and Tian Yu being swept away. However, there was nothing they could do in the face of the spatial turbulence. They watched as another spatial turbulence rushed towards the main square. Fortunately, the experts of the Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect arrived at this time and protected everyone on the main square. At the same time, the experts of the Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect all over the Sacred Palace took action to protect batch after batch of Sacred Palace disciples. Moreover, Enyangzi also took action and gradually stabilized the rampaging spatial force. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 12:23. Ghost Frost Sovereign's madness was completely unexpected. Even with Yin Yangzi's intervention and the help of the Taiyang sect's experts, over 10,000 Sacred Palace disciples were still swept into the spatial turbulence. No one knew if they were dead or alive. Most of them were naturally ordinary disciples of the Sacred Palace. They were weak and had no one to protect them. But the most heartbreaking thing was that Xiao Qun and Tian Yu were also swept into the spatial turbulence. After being rescued by the experts of the Taiyang sect, Qin Shuru and the other two immediately wanted to rush into the void to save Xiao Qun, but they were stopped by Chun Ling, Long Qing, Chen Yu and the others. "Let go of me," Qin Shuru said with a cold face. Flower Fairy and Gu Lingyao were the same. Facing the three women's cold shouts, Chen Yu and the others clearly could not let go. Chen Ling opened his mouth to comfort them. "Calm down, I know you're worried about third brother, but even if you rush into the void now, what can you do? Not only will you not be able to save third brother, but you might even die. What will you do then? Moreover, third brother was only swept away by the spatial turbulence. He might not necessarily be in danger. Perhaps he was just teleported to another place. If you do this, what will happen to third brother when he returns?" After hearing Chen Ling's words, Qin Shuru and the other two women still refused to give up. Seeing this, everyone knew that the three women wouldn't listen to anything they said. In the end, Long Qing had no choice but to directly knock the three women out. Only then did they calm down. At this moment, the three women were in a fit of anger. It was useless to say anything, so they could only temporarily restrain them. After doing all this, Xiao Xing and the others came to the experts of the Taiyang sect and cupped their hands in thanks. The spatial turbulence was basically under control. Although there were still some losses, there was nothing they could do about it. After the spatial turbulence was brought under control, Ghost Frost looked at Yin Yangzi and said coldly, "Yin Yangzi, I'll remember what happened today. Let's go." Since the Sacred Palace had already paid the price, Sovereign Ghost Frost didn't continue to pester them. If they fought to the death with the Heavenly Yin Sun sect, the Ghost Emperor sect would be at a disadvantage. Therefore, Sovereign Ghost Frost chose to retreat without hesitation. Under the leadership of Sovereign Gui Shuang, the experts of the Ghost Emperor sect quickly retreated. Yin Yangzi did not pursue them. After all, the Sacred Palace was the most important task this time, and the priority was to take the Sacred Palace away from the Ghost Clan territory. So many people, including Xiao Xing, naturally knew that he was the great sage. So everyone from the Sacred Palace, including Xiao Xing. Yin Yangzi didn't care about their greetings and said calmly, "Let's leave this place first." After leaving the ghost race's territory, Xiao Xing and the others hesitated for a moment. But in the end, they still said, "Senior, one of our chosen has been swept into the spatial turbulence." Xiao Xing was obviously talking about Xiao Qun. His purpose was to get Yin Yangzi to save him. But Yin Yangzi shook his head slightly. "He's already been swept into the spatial turbulence. I can't do anything about it. It all depends on his own fortune. If he's lucky enough not to be swept into the spatial turbulence, we may have a chance to meet again in the future." Yin Yangzi couldn't do anything about it. Xiao Xing was unwilling to accept this, but there was nothing he could do. If even Yin Yangzi couldn't do anything about it, then there was no need to mention the others. Xiao Xing and the others didn't have any more time to think. Moreover, to Yin Yangzi, the so-called chosen of the Sacred Palace wasn't worth mentioning. Since he was unfortunately swept into the spatial turbulence, he could only resign himself to fate. In any case, Yin Yangzi wouldn't make a big fuss over a single person. Afterwards, the entire Sacred Palace was forcefully lifted with the help of Yin Yangzi and the experts of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin. It hovered in the air before quickly flying towards the human domain. The entire Saint Palace had been taken away, including the various cultivation mystic realms and heritage mystic realms of the Saint Palace. Along the way, Yin Yangzi and the Taiyang sect experts protected them, so they were naturally safe. While the Sacred Palace group was forcefully heading towards the human territory, Shao Chen and Tian Yu were tightly holding each other's hands in the spatial turbulence. Spatial turbulence raged in the spatial turbulence. Such spatial storms were absolutely fatal to cultivators of a lower cultivation level. Even Shao Chen found it difficult to deal with these spatial storms. Shao Chen's physical body was strong and his skin was thick. But even so, Shao Chen's body was still covered in wounds and blood flowed freely. Tian Yu was in the same situation as Shao Chen. Seeing that Tian Yu's clothes were quickly dyed red with blood, Shao Chen didn't think too much about it. He pulled Tian Yu into his arms and used his body to protect her. The spatial storms constantly tore at Shao Chen's body like sharp blades. In response, Tian Yu was already sobbing. "Husband, let go of me. Don't do this." Shao Chen used his body to protect himself. As a result, the spatial storms that Shao Chen had to endure were much stronger. Tian Yu said tearfully. Shao Chen forced a smile when he heard Tian Yu's words. "Don't worry, I'm fine. My skin is thick and my flesh is thick." There was no way to control his body in the spatial turbulence. He could only allow himself to be carried along by the spatial turbulence. His injuries were getting worse and worse. Shao Chen forced himself not to pass out. He knew very well that if he fell unconscious at this time, it would be really dangerous. As long as he could endure it, there would be a chance of survival. One mustn't fall into a state of unconsciousness in the spatial turbulence. This was common sense. That was why Shao Chen gritted his teeth. Otherwise, he would pass out. No one knew how long they had been floating in the boundless, dark void. Finally, when Shao Chen's consciousness began to turn groggy, a spatial crack appeared without any warning. Shao Chen and Tian Yu were directly blown out of the spatial storm into the spatial turbulence. There was a lake with beautiful scenery. The lake wasn't too big. There were 2 short mountains on both sides of the lake, and the surroundings were filled with reed. On this day, a spatial crack suddenly appeared in the sky. Then, a man covered in blood and carrying a young woman in his arms shot out of the spatial crack and crashed to the ground. The 2 of them were naturally Shao Chen and Tian Yu. They shot out of the spatial crack and crashed to the ground. At that moment, Shao Chen couldn't hold on any longer. His vision turned black and he lost consciousness. On the other hand, Tian Yu, who had been protected by Shao Chen, didn't suffer any serious injuries. Therefore, after the 2 of them landed, Tian Yu struggled to her feet. Without any hesitation, she took out a sacred healing pill and fed it to Shao Chen. "Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it." Chapter 12:24. After feeding Shao Chen a sacred level healing pill and confirming that Shao Chen's life was not in danger, Tian Yu breathed a sigh of relief and began to look at the surrounding environment. There was no one around. It seemed that this should be a wilderness. The scenery was pretty good. After confirming that there was no danger around, Tian Yu also sat down on the ground. Although her situation was much better than Shao Chen's, she was still extremely tired at this time. There should be no danger for the time being. It was good that Shao Chen had enough time to recover from his injuries. After all, neither of them knew where they were now. It was indeed troublesome to drag a seriously injured body. After resting for more than an hour and recovering some spiritual power, Tian Yu carried Shao Chen all the way to the dense forest by the lake. She found a towering ancient tree and dug a tree hole. This was the temporary shelter for the 2. She then checked Shao Chen's injuries. They were very serious, but fortunately, Shao Chen's physical body was strong. Otherwise, such injuries would definitely cripple him even if he did not die. It was also because of the tempered battle body's 3rd heavenly body that had the ability to heal quickly. When they were in the void, Shao Chen was constantly recovering from his injuries, which was why he was able to survive. However, because he overused the self-healing ability of the heavenly body realm, Shao Chen could only rely on his physical body to recover slowly. He could no longer use the ability of the tempered battle body. A day passed. At noon the next day, Shao Chen slowly woke up. Seeing Shao Chen wake up, Tian Yu hurriedly came over and asked Shao Chen with concern. "Husband, how are you?" "It's just a small injury. I'm fine." Hearing Tian Yu's question, Shao Chen smiled. As long as his life was not in danger, Shao Chen did not think it was a big problem. This was confidence brought by the tempered battle body. After casually chatting with Tian Yu for a while, he also found out about the current situation of the two of them. He did not know where exactly this place was, but for now, the best plan was to recuperate. Only when their injuries were completely healed would they have the ability to deal with various dangers. They didn't intend to leave this place in a hurry. Now, this lake was the most suitable place for Shao Chen and Yi Shiwen to recuperate. This could be considered their only bit of luck. At least they didn't fall into a wolf's den or a tiger's den. After checking his body, Shao Chen found that the injuries in his body were not light. It was obviously impossible for him to fully recover in half a month. Shao Chen felt that half a month was a very long time. However, if other people knew about this, they would probably curse. Shao Chen's injuries would have been life-threatening even for a semi-sage expert. However, Shao Chen had recovered in just half a month. This couldn't be said to be abnormal. It was simply heaven-defying. This was the advantage of having a strong physical body. It was like an unkillable cockroach. Shao Chen and Tian Yu spent almost every day recuperating. Tian Yu's injuries were much lighter than Shao Chen's, but what was incredible was that Shao Chen's injuries healed faster than Tian Yu's. It only took 10 days for Shao Chen's injuries to fully recover. It took 5 days less than expected. The help of the medicinal pills couldn't be ignored. Shao Chen was the first to recover. Such self-healing speed made Tian Yu envious. He had an immortal body. As long as he was hanging on by a breath, he could quickly recover. His physical body was definitely Shao Chen's strong point. There was no doubt about this. After waiting for another 3 days, Tian Yu's injuries were completely healed. Only then did the two of them prepare to leave this place. Although this place was safe, Shao Chen and Tian Yu obviously couldn't stay for long. Due to the spatial turbulence, they had been separated from the Sacred Palace group. Hence, Shao Chen and Tian Yu's current goal was naturally to return to the Sacred Palace as soon as possible. They didn't know where this place was, nor did they have any good ideas. Shao Chen and Tian Yu could only choose a direction and force their way out of this place. It would be best if they could find a city or village. That way they could ask where this place was. At the very least, they could find out which clan's territory this place belonged to. They didn't encounter any danger along the way. 2 days later, Shao Chen and Tian Yu finally arrived outside a small village. From a distance, the village didn't seem very big. It only had a population of 100 or so households. Without much thought, Shao Chen and Tian Yu directly headed towards the village. But before they could get far, an arrow suddenly shot out, heading straight for Shao Chen and Tian Yu. It was a sudden attack, but a mere arrow like this posed no threat to Shao Chen and Tian Yu. They couldn't even be bothered to dodge the arrow. Instead, they used their physical bodies to take the arrow head-on. Even though the arrow struck Shao Chen's body was as hard as steel. The arrow didn't hurt Shao Chen in the slightest. How is this possible? As soon as the arrow landed, a cry of surprise sounded from nearby. Shao Chen looked in the direction of the voice and saw a young demon race youth standing there with a bow in his hand. Demon race? A strange glint flashed in Shao Chen's eyes when he saw the young demon race youth. Then, Shao Chen easily sensed that there were dozens of demon race cultivators hiding in the surroundings. Shao Chen guessed that there were so many demon race cultivators. At the same time, He looked at the young demon race youth and said indifferently, "Where is this place?" "Human race?" asked Shao Chen. But the young demon race youth didn't answer. Instead, he snapped out of his daze and shouted coldly. As soon as the young demon race youth finished speaking, the demon race cultivators hiding in the surroundings revealed themselves. The leader was a middle-aged man with a cultivation base of the Tao transformation stage. These demon race cultivators seemed to be full of hostility toward Shao Chen and Tianyu. As soon as they appeared, the middle-aged man in the lead shouted coldly, "A human and a heavenly race cultivator. Attack and kill them." Without further ado, the middle-aged man ordered Shao Chen and Tianyu to be killed. Upon hearing this, Shao Chen wasn't surprised. After all, this was a special period of time. When the major races met, there was basically no such thing as peace. Since the dozens of demon race cultivators attacked, Shao Chen naturally wouldn't sit still and wait for death. These demon race cultivators were like clay chickens and pottery dogs in front of Shao Chen. Without much effort, Shao Chen killed all the demon race cultivators, leaving only the middle-aged man alive. Shao Chen walked up to the middle-aged man and asked in a deep voice, "Where is this place?" Shao Chen spared the man's life, because he wanted to know something from him. After some questioning, Shao Chen finally learned that this was the territory of the demon race. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 12:25. This was the territory of the demon race. There was a city in the north called Heavenly Demon City, which could be considered a large city in the demon race's territory. After learning the information he wanted from this middle-aged demon, Shao Chen did not hesitate to end his life with a palm strike. Shao Chen was merciless when it came to killing these devils. If you didn't kill him, he would kill you. When the War of the 100 Races was about to break out, there was no need for any reason to kill each other. In the blink of an eye, he killed dozens of demon warriors. Shao Chen sighed softly and said, "It seems that the demon race's territory is a little troublesome." Although the demon race and the human race were not as hostile as the ghost race and the human race, they were definitely not friendly. Moreover, in this unusual period, Shao Chen was not confident that he could leave the demon race's territory safely. Here, Shao Chen did not understand the division of the territories of the various races in the central world at all. He also did not know if the demon race's territory was connected to the human race's territory. If not, it would be really troublesome to return to the human race's territory. Falling into silence, Tianyu did not disturb Shao Chen when she saw him pondering. After a while, Shao Chen made a decision. Now, it could be said that he was in complete darkness and did not understand the situation in the central world at all. This was obviously not good. Therefore, Shao Chen planned to go to Heavenly Demon City first. It would be best if he could get a map in the city and figure out the division of the territories of the various races in the central world. Only then could he formulate the next step of his plan. Entering the Heavenly Demon City was obviously a very dangerous thing to do. One had to know that the Heavenly Demon City was one of the largest cities in the demon race's territory. Naturally, it wasn't something this small demon race tribe could compare to. The strongest person in this demon race tribe was only at the Tao transformation realm. However, Heavenly Demon City was different. There was a quasi-sage great venerable overseeing it. The consequences of entering Heavenly Demon City as a human could be imagined. Therefore, if he wanted to enter the Heavenly Demon City, he had to find a way to conceal his identity. Glancing at the corpses of the demons, Shao Chen secretly exhorted before making a bold decision. Just like the ghost race, the demons liked to wear loose black robes and cover their faces. This custom gave Shao Chen a chance to make his move. "I can only give it a try." With a sigh, Shao Chen collected 2 black robes of the best quality from the corpses of the demons. He and Tianyu draped the black robes over their bodies and covered their faces. Their faces could no longer be seen. The only thing left was to conceal their auras. Concealing their auras was a piece of cake for Shao Chun and Tianyu. Very quickly, their auras were completely cut off. Even a saint stage expert would not be able to sense them. With the cover of the black robes, it was really difficult to see through the identities of Shao Chun and his companion. They were no different from ordinary demons, except that they were a little thinner. After all, demons were generally very tall and strong. But it was just a small flaw, so it was not a big deal. After making the necessary preparations, Shao Chun and Tianyu flew all the way to the north. After flying for about half a day, Shao Chun and Tianyu finally arrived at the Heavenly Demon City. Looking from afar, the huge Heavenly Demon City looked like a huge beast lying on the ground. The city walls, buildings, and various other buildings were all blood-red. At first glance, the entire Heavenly Demon City gave off the feeling of a huge beast with its mouth wide open, ready to devour all living things. The Heavenly Demon City was very big and prosperous. However, it was not considered shocking to Shao Chun and Tianyu. After all, both of them were the first saints in the North Star territory. Naturally, they had a good eye for things. No matter how prosperous a city was, it was difficult for the two of them to be too shocked. Along the way to the city gate, many of the demons who were rushing into the city were like Shao Chun and Tianyu. They were all wearing black robes that covered their faces. With so many demons, Shao Chun and Tianyu did not feel out of place at all. Following the crowd, the two of them successfully entered the city. It was unknown whether the demons were too confident or too lazy. Although the city gate of the Heavenly Demon City was guarded by demon experts, it was almost useless. There was no check at all. Entering the Heavenly Demon City safely, Shao Chun and Tianyu first found an inn to stay. Then, Shao Chun bought a map of the Central World. With just a glance, Shao Chun's heart sank again. The demon territory and the human territory did not border. They were separated by the beast race, ghost race, and barbarian race. In other words, from the demon territory, no matter which direction one took, one had to pass through one of the three races: the beast race, ghost race, and barbarian race. Only then could one reach the human territory. Judging from the location of the Heavenly Demon City, the shortest route from the Heavenly Demon City to the human territory was to pass through the territories of the beast race and ghost race. Passing through the territories of the beast race and ghost race and choosing one of the two was actually not a good choice. Shao Chun already knew about the relationship between the ghost race and the human race, so Shao Chun immediately ruled out the idea of passing through the ghost race's territory. In this way, only the beast race was left. Compared to the ghost race, it was obviously safer to go from the beast race's territory to the human race's territory. There were two reasons for this. First, the relationship between the beast race and the human race was not as tense as the relationship between the human race and the ghost race. Second, it was easier for Shao Chun and Tianyu to hide their identities in the beast race's territory. After all, once the beast race transformed, there was not much difference in their appearance from the human race. Therefore, as long as Shao Chun and Tianyu hid their aura, there would be no problem. Of course, the premise was that Tianyu could not reveal her identity as a member of the divine race. However, it was also very easy to hide her identity as a member of the divine race. After all, the only difference between the divine race and the human race was the mark on their forehead. As long as Tianyu did not reveal the mark on her forehead, there would be no problem. Shao Chun already had a general plan. He hurriedly returned to the inn and went to his room. He carefully looked at the map in his hand and constantly perfected the route. They had to pass through the territories of the two races in a row. During this period, it was obviously impossible for everything to go smoothly, so many things had to be prepared in advance. Shao Chun had already expected that the journey would not be peaceful, and there would definitely be danger. However, he did not expect that the danger would come so quickly. Just as Xiao Chun stared at the map and seemed to be deep in thought, the door that was originally tightly shut was suddenly kicked open. Then, a young man in a black robe who reeked of alcohol strode in. Motherf *Ker, what kind of lousy inn is this? There isn't even a pretty lady here. I say. The young man cursed as soon as he stepped through the door. But before he could finish his sentence, his voice stopped abruptly. At the same time, he looked at Xiao Chen and Tianyu in front of him with a horrified expression. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 12:26. The young man stared blankly at Xiao Chen and Tianyu. The reason for this was that Xiao Chen and Tianyu were not wearing black robes, so their appearances were not exposed in front of the young man. Human. After a brief moment of shock, the young man quickly regained his senses. The alcohol in his body quickly dissipated, and a trace of coldness emerged in his eyes. He did not expect that someone would suddenly barge in. However, Xiao Chen did not hesitate and immediately attacked. He moved his feet and charged towards the young man from the demon clan. Since he had been discovered, he had no choice but to kill him. The young man from the demon clan shouted coldly when he saw Xiao Chen suddenly attack. You're courting death. As he spoke, a towering aura erupted from the young man's body. He had reached the perfect Dao King stage. To be able to reach the great perfection Dao King realm at such a young age, such a person's identity should not be simple. It should be known that in the sacred palace, a great perfection Dao King realm cultivation was at least at the level of a core disciple. Things were a little unexpected, but Xiao Chen clearly did not have the time to consider this now. The only thing on Xiao Chen's mind was to kill the young man from the demon clan as soon as possible. With a thought, the dustless sword appeared in his hand. As Xiao Chen's cultivation improved, the dustless sword was also much stronger than when it was first formed. Xiao Chen slashed out with the sword. At the same time, he said to Tianyu, "Kill everyone in this inn." Such a battle must have alarmed the others in the inn, and even the guards of the heavenly devil city had been alerted. Therefore, Xiao Chen ordered Tianyu to kill everyone in the inn to prevent any clues from being left behind. They definitely could not stay in this place, but the most important thing was that Xiao Chen and Tianyu's identities could not be exposed. As long as their identities were not exposed, things would not be too bad. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's order, Tianyu immediately rushed out of the room and began to kill everyone in the guest battle without any mercy. Tianyu made a move, and Xiao Chen's sword also slashed out. There was no time to waste, so Xiao Chen used the Saint-grade martial skill 9 sifting sword chi right from the start. Golden sword chi flashed past, and at the same time, great perfection sword will gushed out. The young man, who had been brimming with fighting spirit, was just about to say something. You've got some guts, human. I can't believe you came all the way to Heavenly Devil City too. He originally wanted to say that he was courting death, but as Xiao Chen slashed out with his sword, the young man's expression changed drastically. The young man was clearly very confident in his own strength. When he looked at Xiao Chen, who was about the same age as him, the young man thought that victory was in his grasp. However, who would have thought that a single sword strike would make the young man's hair stand on end? Strong, very strong. Xiao Chen's sword made the young man feel as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. The young man didn't even have time to react. The tip of the sword slashed across. The young man wanted to dodge, but unfortunately, he didn't succeed in the end. The golden tip of the sword slashed across his neck, and then a head flew into the air. Killing the young man with a single slash wasn't difficult for Xiao Chen. Although the young man's talent might be decent, it was only decent. Compared to a top holy son like Xiao Chen, the young man was still too weak. After killing the young man, Xiao Chen didn't hesitate. He grabbed the black robe beside him and put it on, covering his face once again. Then, he strode out of the room. Xiao Chen's battle was over, and Tian Yu's side had also slaughtered everyone in the inn. The two of them met up, and Xiao Chen said softly, "Let's go." They could already sense more than 10 auras rushing toward them. Apparently, the battle just now had attracted the attention of the Heavenly Devil City's guards. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen slashed down with his sword, and the inn was immediately razed to the ground. Xiao Chen and Tian Yu's figures also disappeared. They blended into the crowd and came to a small alley. At this time, Xiao Chen secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, Tian Yu also asked, "Husband, what should we do now?" "Don't worry. Let's find a chance to get out of the city first," Xiao Chen said. He knew very well that their identities could only be concealed for a while. After all, when they killed the young man just now, their auras had been left behind. As long as someone had a good eye, it wouldn't be difficult to determine their identities as humans from their auras. They had to get out of the city quickly. Otherwise, it would be very troublesome if they were late. At the same time, Xiao Chen secretly prayed that the young man's identity wouldn't be too difficult to deal with. He hoped that the young man was merely an ordinary member of the devil race. In that way, Xiao Chen and the others would have more time. However, if the young man's identity was very great, then it would be a different matter. Xiao Chen and Tian Yu didn't hesitate to directly rush out of the city. Not long after Xiao Chen and Tian Yu left, a few young men and women in similar clothes appeared in the sky outside the ruined inn. Every single one of these young men and women weren't very old, but their cultivations were extremely terrifying. The weakest amongst them was at the Dao King realm, and the person in the lead was even at the advanced stage of the Dao Emperor realm. If Xiao Chen was here, then he would definitely be shocked. Because the young man in the lead, who was at the advanced stage of the Dao Emperor realm, was none other than Sha Mo from the Northern Star Dimension. Sha Mo was originally a holy son of the Devil Sky Palace. Unfortunately, the Devil Sky Palace had been destroyed in the end, and Sha Mo had come to the Central World with the others. Compared to Xiao Chen, Sha Mo had arrived in the Central World almost 3 years earlier. During these 3 years, Sha Mo had successfully joined the Devil Emperor Palace and become a prospective holy son of the Devil Emperor Palace. The Devil Emperor Palace couldn't be underestimated. It was a great saint sect of the Devil race, and its strength wasn't inferior to the Ghost Emperor sect of the Ghost race or the Heavenly Yin and Yang sects of the human race. He didn't know that Sha Mo would appear here, nor did he know that the young man from the Devil race he just killed was actually a disciple of the Devil Emperor Palace. Killing a disciple of the Devil Emperor Palace was absolutely no small matter. Even if it was just an ordinary disciple, it was still no small matter. He slowly descended to the ruins, and it didn't take long for 2 disciples of the Devil Emperor Palace to carry out the corpse of the young man from before. Sha Mo's expression was calm as he looked at the young man whose head had been separated from his body. He seemed as if he didn't care at all. However, this calmness quickly changed. For some unknown reason, a wisp of shock suddenly flashed through Sha Mo's eyes, but he quickly concealed it. At the same time, Sha Mo used his own aura to conceal the fierce sword intent that belonged to Xiao Chen to prevent others from noticing it. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. Chapter 12:27. Sha Mo squatted down and seemed to be seriously sizing up the disciple's corpse. However, no one noticed that Sha Mo had erased Xiao Chen's aura from the corpse. In this way, no one could determine Xiao Chen's identity as a human from the corpse. Sha Mo and Xiao Chen could be considered old rivals. At the same time, they could be said to be old friends. Thus, Sha Mo recognized Xiao Chen from the aura. Sha Mo felt very complicated. He was both excited and agitated. Xiao Chen had actually appeared in Heavenly Demon City. This was something that Sha Mo had not expected. On the surface, he acted as if nothing had happened. Soon, a disciple of the Devil Emperor Palace landed in front of Sha Move and bowed respectfully. "Senior brother, everyone in the inn has been killed. Yes, keep the corpse well. Also, see if anyone in the surroundings witnessed what happened," Sha Move said indifferently. Hearing Sha Move's words, the disciple was about to nod in agreement. However, he was first interrupted by another disciple beside Sha Move. "Senior brother, I'm afraid that's not appropriate. We should first seal the city gates." This person looked to be about the same age as Sha Move. He was at the initial Dao Emperor realm and was a core disciple of the Devil Emperor Palace. At this moment, his words were filled with hostility. Obviously, this disciple did not like Sha Move. Their relationship was not harmonious. This was actually because of jealousy. After all, Sha Move had only joined the Devil Emperor Palace for a short period of 3 years. However, he was already a prospective holy son. On the other hand, he was still an ordinary disciple. Thus, this young man and Sha Move had always been on bad terms. Of course, what he said was not wrong. They should indeed seal the city gates at the first possible moment to prevent the murderer from escaping. However, Sha Move did not care about this at all. "Do I need you to teach me how to do things? Don't you know the punishment for offending a superior in the Devil Emperor Palace? Do you believe that no one will say anything if I kill you right now?" Towards this disciple, Sha Move's attitude was extremely cold. Hearing this, although this disciple was unwilling, he did not dare to go against Sha Move. He cupped his hands and bowed. "Senior brother, please calm down. It was junior brother who was rude earlier." The Devil Emperor Palace had a strict hierarchy. Contradicting a prospective holy son was indeed a serious crime. Sha Move ignored this disciple. The reason why he did not immediately seal the city gates was to give Shao Chen more time so that Shao Chen could take the opportunity to leave Heavenly Demon City. No one noticed Sha Move's abnormality, let alone know what Sha Move was thinking. Under the deliberate delay of Sha Move's actions, the Heavenly Demon City's city, Sha Move was a holy son too. 10 hours had passed, and it was obvious that Shao Chen and Tian Yu had already left the city. They already had a map of the central world. Although there would be some differences in the map due to the fusion of the 4 great astral realms and the central world, the division of the various races' territories would not change. As long as this was ensured, Shao Chen could use this map to find the route back to the human race's territory. They left Heavenly Demon City early in the morning. At night, Shao Chen and Tian Yu came to a dense forest not far from Heavenly Demon City to rest. Along the way, they did not discover any pursuers. Shao Chen and Tian Yu secretly heaved a sigh of relief. While the two of them were resting in Heavenly Demon City, in the City Lord's mansion, Sha Move's courtyard. At this moment, Sha Move, who was cultivating with his eyes closed in the room, suddenly opened his eyes. A middle-aged man with Saint Realm cultivation appeared in front of him and bowed respectfully to Sha Move. "Master, we have found them." This middle-aged man was also an expert from the Demon Emperor Palace. However, he did not have a close relationship with the Demon Emperor Palace. He could be considered as Sha Move's guard, just like Elder Master Bai who followed Shao Chen. Speaking of Elder Master Bai, it had indeed been a long time since he followed Shao Chen. Their main task now was to protect Bai Ruiyue and Shao Qing. With Shao Chen's help, the two of them had also broken through to the Saint Realm. Now that they thought about it, it should be better for them to stay by Bai Ruiyue and Shao Qing's side. They were of the same nature as Elder Master Bai. Therefore, this middle-aged man actually only listened to Sha Move. Therefore, during the day, when Sha Move deliberately created an opportunity for Shao Chen, he sent this man to search for Shao Chen's whereabouts. Now, he had finally found him. Hearing this middle-aged man's words, Sha Move smiled slightly and said, "Brother Shao Chen, I wonder what kind of expression you will have when we meet again." With that, Sha-Move quietly left Heavenly Demon City alone. He did not bring anyone else with him, not even the middle-aged man. Following the middle-aged man's instructions, he came to the dense forest alone. At this time, Shao Chen and Tian Yu were also closing their eyes in the dense forest. Recovering the spiritual energy in his body, Shao Chen suddenly stood up. With a thought, the dustless sword appeared in his hand. Looking at the pitch-black dense forest in front of him, Shao Chen coldly shouted, "Who is it? Come out." It was impossible for Shao Chen to be completely defenseless when he was in the territory of the devil race. As such, Shao Chen's sharp senses allowed him to sense that someone was approaching him. Although the person was trying his best to hide his aura, Shao Chen was still able to sense it. Along with Shao Chen's shout, a demon clad in a black robe and whose face could not be seen walked out slowly from the darkness. Upon seeing this demon, Shao Chen's eyes glinted with murderous intent. He didn't know why this demon would appear here. But no matter what, Shao Chen had already decided to kill this demon on the spot. With this thought in mind, Shao Chen did not hesitate and was about to slash out with his sword. But at this moment, the demon in the black robe suddenly spoke. "Brother Shao Chen, I didn't expect to see you here." Along with this voice, Shao Chen's hand movement paused slightly. Then, the demon slowly removed the black robe that covered his face. At this moment, Shao Chen finally saw the appearance of this demon. A look of surprise appeared on Shao Chen's face as he called out in a low voice, "Shamohi." The demon was naturally Shamo. "I didn't expect to see Shamo here." At the same time, the dustless sword in his hand disappeared. The two of them looked at each other. Since they parted ways in the Sky River mainland, they had not seen each other for dozens of years. It was almost equivalent to an ordinary person's lifetime. However, for Shao Chen and Shamov, it was just like the blink of an eye. Their appearances did not change at all. They were still exactly the same as when they were in the Sky River mainland. Seeking collection, monthly votes, recommendation. Chapter 12:28. It had been a few decades since they parted ways in the Heavenly River continent. Both Shao Chen and Sha Mo felt a little emotional when they met again. After looking at each other for a few moments, Shao Chen broke the silence with a faint smile. "Yeah, I didn't expect to meet you here." Shao Chen turned to Tian Yu, who had an unfriendly expression, and said, "It's fine. He's a friend from the past." Tian Yu naturally didn't know who Sha Mo was. If Shao Chen didn't mention it, Tian Yu would have killed Sha Mo. Even though Sha Mo was the quasi-holy son of the Demon Emperor Palace, in terms of strength, he was still inferior to Tian Yu. After all, Tian Yu was once the #1 holy lady of the North Star boundary. Sha Mo smiled and nodded at Tian Yu. Then, he shifted his gaze to Shao Chen and said with a smile, "Brother Shao, I'm really impressed. You actually managed to get holy daughter Tian Yu to." Before he could finish his sentence, Sha Mo revealed an expression that all men understood. Shao Chen did not dwell on this issue. He made a gesture of invitation, and the two of them sat down under a large tree. Shao Chen then opened his mouth and asked, "How did you find me?" Shao Chen was a bit confused as to why Sha Mo would appear here. Facing Shao Chen's question, Sha Mo did not hide anything and said with a smile, "When I saw the corpse, I knew it was you." Sha Mo found out about Shao Chen through the remnant sword intent on the corpse. Then, Sha Mo told Shao Chen about his experiences over the years. Shao Chen had heard that Sha Mo had joined the demonic Sky Palace in the North Star Realm, and now he was in the Demon Emperor Palace. He had not expected Sha Mo to have experienced so many things, especially when they had crossed the edge of the horizon. It had been a close shave with death, but Sha Mo was lucky to have made it to the central world alive. Shao Chen asked after hearing Sha Mo's words, "Do you hate me?" "About the Demon Emperor Palace." Previously, Xiao Chen did not know that Sha Mo was a disciple of the demonic Sky Palace. In fact, this was normal. After all, Sha Mo was not well known. Moreover, Xiao Chen did not pay special attention to him. Therefore, it was natural that he did not know. The destruction of the demonic Sky Palace was definitely related to the sacred palace. Since Sha Mo was the holy son of the demonic Sky Palace, Xiao Chen naturally had reason to guess that he would resent the sacred palace. However, in the face of Xiao Chen's question, Sha Mo merely smiled and shook his head. What's there to be ruthless about? Survival of the fittest. This is how the world works. Moreover, my feelings for the demonic Sky Palace aren't as deep as you think. Sha Mo did not feel much about the destruction of the demonic Sky Palace. First of all, Sha Mo had not been a disciple of the demonic Sky Palace for a long time. Moreover, from the beginning, Sha Mo had opposed the alliance between the demonic Sky Palace and the Night Ghost Pavilion. Unfortunately, no one listened to him. Therefore, in Sha Mo's opinion, the destruction of the demonic Sky Palace was completely self-inflicted. He had no intention of bearing a grudge against the sacred palace because of the destruction of the demonic Sky Palace. Sha Mo was living quite well now. The quasi-holy son of the Supreme Saint sect, the Demon Emperor Palace, was actually not inferior to the holy son of the demonic Sky Palace. In fact, his status was even higher. After all, the Demon Emperor Palace was a Supreme Saint sect. After chatting with each other for a while and recounting their experiences over the years, Sha Mo finally got to the main topic. He looked at Xiao Chen with a serious expression and asked, "Brother Xiao, why are you in the Heavenly Devil City? You must know that it's not a good thing for a human to appear in the demon race's territory at this time." "Sigh, it's a long story," Xiao Chen said softly when he heard this. It was very strange that Xiao Chen would appear in the Heavenly Devil City. When faced with Sha Mo's question, Xiao Chen quickly gave a simple explanation. Sha Mo sighed softly when he learned the cause and effect of the matter. He didn't expect that the North Star world no longer existed and had completely merged into the Central world. Xiao Chen had appeared here by accident because of the spatial turbulence. If Xiao Chen wanted to return to the human race's territory, he would have to cross the territories of the demon race and the beast race. Such a long journey would be dangerous. Not to mention a Tao Emperor realm cultivator like Xiao Chen, even a quasi-saint supreme venerate might die. It wasn't a simple journey. It could be said to be filled with danger. After listening to Xiao Chen's explanation, Sha Mo was silent for a long time, and then he took out a black token from his spatial ring and handed it to Xiao Chen. "This is the token of the Demon Emperor Palace. Brother Xiao, it should be much more convenient for you to act in the demon race's territory with this token. Moreover, you can use the teleportation formations in the various cities. It'll be safer this way. However, once you reach the beast race's territory, there's nothing I can do." He had no intention of capturing Xiao Chen and bringing him back to the Demon Emperor Palace. Although capturing Xiao Chen might be a great merit, it was meaningless to Sha Mo. He didn't care about such a small reward. On the contrary, Sha Mo hoped that Xiao Chen could safely return to the human race's territory. It was for no other reason than the fact that they were friends. If the people of the Demon Emperor Palace found out that he had privately given the token of the Demon Emperor Palace, it would absolutely be a serious crime. However, Sha Mo still gave this token to Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen took the black token from Sha Mo's hand. He did not refuse, as this token could indeed help him a lot. Xiao Chen didn't have many words of gratitude for Sha Mo's help. The relationship between the two was a little delicate. Moreover, Xiao Chen wasn't someone who was good at thanking others. After keeping the token, Xiao Chen looked at Sha Mo and said, "Brother Sha, I can't thank you enough. I'll remember today's matter." Do we still need to say these things? Alright, this is all I can help you with. Be careful, I'm going back. Hearing this, Shamo scolded with a smile. He then stood up and patted the dust off his body. Now that he had seen and done what he could, Shamo also planned to leave. Seeing this, Xiao Chen didn't urge him to stay. Now wasn't the time to reminisce. Xiao Chen also stood up. Looking at Shamo, who was about to leave, Xiao Chen said emotionally, "The next time we meet may be on the battlefield again. Brother Sha, don't die. If there's a chance in the future, you and I should drink and chat again." Sha Mo was from the Demon Clan and was also the prospective holy son of the Demon Emperor Palace. Xiao Chen was from the Human Clan. The two of them were still in different camps. Moreover, it was now the 100-clan war. When the time came, who could guarantee that the Human Clan and the Demon Clan wouldn't go to war? At that time, it wasn't impossible to meet on the battlefield. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Shamo smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't die so easily. You, on the other hand, should first safely return to the Human Clan's territory before talking about other things." After speaking, without waiting for Xiao Chen's reply, Shamo directly disappeared into the darkness in a flash. After watching Shamo leave, Xiao Chen looked at Tian Yu and nodded slightly. Then, the two of them also left under the cover of the night. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 12:29. After safely retreating from the Heavenly Devil City and obtaining the Demon Emperor Palace token, Xiao Chen also personally experienced the power of the Demon Emperor Palace token during their journey. With the token in hand, no matter which city he went to, there would be no obstructions. When he entered the city, the guards would not even dare to check him. It was just as Xiao Mo he had said. With this token, it would save him a lot of trouble. The journey was much smoother. Moreover, because of the token, Xiao Chen and Sha Mo could also use the teleportation arrays in the various demon race cities. As a result, their speed was much faster. In a short 10 days, Xiao Chen and the others entered the beast race's territory. By now, Xiao Chen and Sha Mo had already taken off their black robes. In the beast race's territory, there was no point in wearing black robes anymore. In fact, it was a bad thing. They swaggered along the road and showed their true appearance. After all, there were many demonic beasts in the beast race's territory. As long as they didn't expose their aura, there wouldn't be much of a problem. After successfully leaving the demon race's territory and entering the beast race's territory, Xiao Chen and Sha Mo took another step closer to the human race's territory. At this time, the sacred palace people in the human race's territory finally settled down. The place where they settled down was not far from the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. The environment was not bad, and it was much better than the North Star boundary. The entire sacred palace had been moved here together, so there wasn't much to pack. They directly chose the location of the new sect and settled down. The only thing worth mentioning was that the sacred palace had now become a subsidiary sect of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. After all, they were rescued by Yin Yangzi and the experts of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, so it was understandable that they were now a subsidiary sect of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. Moreover, although they were a subsidiary sect of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect would not interfere in the sacred palace's affairs, nor did they require the sacred palace to hand over any resources to the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. The only requirement was that the sacred palace had to obey the orders of the Sky Yin and Taiyang sect when war broke out. No matter who the opponent was, as long as the Sky Yin and Taiyang sect said to fight, the sacred palace had to fight, even if the opponent was one of the three masters of the human race. With just this one request, they could receive the protection of the heavenly Yin and solar sect. Therefore, this choice was not difficult. Xiao Xing and the other three agreed without hesitation. After all, this was the central world. Without the protection of a supreme saint sect, it would be difficult to survive. Moreover, the sacred palace was a foreign force and not a native force of the central world. Their roots were shallow, so they needed the protection of the Yin and Yang sects. It had become a subsidiary sect of the heavenly Yin Sun sect. At the same time, the sacred palace began to search for Shao Chun and Tian Yu with the help of the heavenly Yin Sun sect. Yin Yangzi and the experts of the heavenly Yin Sun sect had no interest in Shao Chun and Tian Yu. They were only doing a little to help the sacred palace. Compared to Shao Chun, Yin Yangzi was actually more curious about the other chosen and saintesses of the sacred palace, especially Long Qing. As the great sage, Yin Yangzi could tell that Long Qing was not a human, but a pure-blooded dragon the moment he saw her. Yin Yangzi did not find it strange that a dragon could become a sacred palace saintess, because such things were not unheard of. Long Qing was a pure-blooded dragon, but she had become a saintess of a human force. Such things were not uncommon in the central world. People called them traitors. Traitors meant that they had betrayed their original race and joined another race. Therefore, it was normal for Long Qing to appear in the sacred palace. What really made Yin Yangzi interested in Long Qing was Long Qing's bloodline. Of course, it was not because of greed. As the great sage, Yin Yangzi was not attracted to a pure-blooded dragon. Although a pure-blooded dragon's body was full of treasures, Yin Yangzi was already standing at the peak of this world. These things were not enough to make him pay too much attention. What really caught Yin Yangzi's attention was the extremely pure power of Long Qing's bloodline. According to Yin Yangzi's guess, Long Qing was a direct descendant even among the pure-blooded dragons. She should be a descendant of the current Dragon Emperor's bloodline. But why would a descendant of the Dragon Emperor's bloodline appear in the sacred palace? One had to know that the pure-blooded dragons of the Dragon Emperor's bloodline were all people of high status among the beast races. Yin Yangzi did not hide Long Qing's curiosity. Therefore, after settling down in the sacred palace, Yin Yangzi personally met Long Qing in the sacred palace. Of course, Shao Xing and the other three ancestors were also present, as well as a group of experts from the Tianyin and Taiyang sects. Long Qing strode into the hall when she received Yin Yangzi's summons. Long Qing naturally had her guard up in the face of so many experts, especially Yin Yangzi. After all, she did not know if Yin Yangzi was interested in her bloodline. In this regard, Yin Yangzi clearly saw through Long Qing's thoughts. As soon as he spoke, Yin Yangzi chuckled and said, "There's no need to be nervous. There's no need to be nervous. The pure-blooded dragon race doesn't have much allure to me. After all, our paths are different. At my level, it would be a joke if I wanted to devour some bloodline power to improve. Furthermore, no one here would covet your bloodline power. I called you here today to talk to you about why you're here in the sacred palace as a descendant of the Dragon Emperor's bloodline." He bluntly told Long Qing that no one present would covet her bloodline power. Long Qing secretly relaxed when she heard this, but she did not dare to be careless. She told Yin Yangzi the truth. After hearing about Long Qing's past, Yin Yangzi finally understood why Long Qing had appeared in the sacred palace, and a smile appeared on his face. No wonder. As soon as Yin Yangzi's voice fell, a half-step great saint from the Taiyang sect of heavenly Yin spoke up hesitantly. "Patriarch, I'm wondering if we should." He was hesitant. Seeing this, Yin Yangzi said indifferently, "If you have something to say, just say it. What are you hemming and hawing for?" After being scolded by Yin Yangzi, the half-step great saint gritted his teeth and said, "Patriarch, I'm wondering if you should speak. Ancestor, I'm thinking that since this little girl is a descendant of the Dragon Emperor's bloodline, can we try to contact the dragon race? If we can join forces with the beast race, it will be easier to deal with the 100-race war." Long Qing's identity made the half-step great saint think of allying with the beast race. Hearing this, everyone present pondered for a moment, then nodded in agreement. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 12:30. Everyone knew that the dragon race valued their bloodline very much, so any pure-blooded dragon race would definitely attract the attention of the dragon race. Hence, when they saw Longqing, they naturally thought of allying with the beast race. In fact, in the central world, the human race was not considered powerful. Among the various races, the human race was far from the top, and was at most in the upper middle. If they could form a good relationship with the beast race, or even the dragon race, it would definitely be great news for the human race. After all, there were only 3 the great sage in the entire human race, and there were 2 the great sage in the dragon race alone. It was imaginable how powerful the dragon race was. They were almost on par with the entire human race. Hearing everyone's suggestion, Yangzi did not have much of a change in expression. After a while, Yangzi waved his hand and said calmly, "There's no need to rush now. It's not too late to talk about it in the future." Everyone's suggestion was to make use of the Longqing, but it was actually not bad for the Longqing. However, Yangzi did not express his agreement, but of course, he did not object either. In Yangzi's opinion, the possibility of making use of the Longqing to form an alliance with the dragon race was not high. That's right, the dragon race did value their bloodline very much, but one should not forget that the dragon race was also extremely arrogant. If they wanted to make use of the Longqing to form an alliance with the dragon race, it would already be a little threatening and bargaining, and the dragon race happened to be an existence that was not afraid of any threats. Hence, it was not realistic to make use of the Longqing to form an alliance with the dragon race. In fact, if they were not careful, they might even anger the dragon race, and by then, it would be self-defeating. Hence, Yangzi did not immediately make a decision, and decided to suppress this matter for the future. After hearing Yangzi's words, everyone did not say anything else. Since Yangzi had already made a decision, they could only follow his orders. No longer dwelling on the matter of the dragon race, Yangzi looked at Shao Xing and the others and smiled. "The sacred palace has just arrived in the central world, so let's have a good rest for a few days. However, starting tomorrow, I will arrange for the sacred palace disciples to be tested for talent. At that time, those with excellent talent can all head to the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect to cultivate." The sacred palace was now a subsidiary sect of the heavenly Yin Yang sect, so any talented disciple could head to the heavenly Yin Yang sect to cultivate. This was great news for the sacred palace. Don't think that these disciples weren't sacred palace disciples just because they went to the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. In fact, they were still sacred palace disciples even if they went to the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. Moreover, the conditions in the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect were clearly much better than in the sacred palace. Fully aware of the benefits, Shao Xing and the others did not think much of Yangzi's words and happily nodded in agreement. After a simple discussion, the crowd dispersed one after another. Yangzi and the heavenly Yin Yang sect experts did not leave. There was still a talent test tomorrow, and Yangzi and the heavenly Yin Yang sect experts wanted to see how talented the sacred palace disciples were. The talent of a sect's disciples was extremely important. The more geniuses there were, the stronger the sect. This was the most basic principle. Hence, Yangzi and the others wanted to understand the sacred palace's strength, or rather, its potential. The best and simplest way was to understand the sacred palace disciples' talent. Unlike the talent test in the North Star world, the Central world already had an extremely perfect system for talent testing. Moreover, in order to more directly reflect the strength of each person's talent, the weapon refiners of the Central world had also researched and refined a treasure called the Talent Testing Stone. Using the Talent Testing Stone to test one's talent, the Talent Testing Stone would perform differently according to the strength of each person's talent. Spirit chi vortexes of different sizes would condense, and the larger the vortex, the stronger the talent. From the weakest 1-meter spirit chi vortex to the strongest 100-meter spirit chi vortex, it represented the strength of each person's talent. After a silent night, early the next morning, Yin-Yangzi, the heavenly Yin-Yang sect experts, Shao Xing and the other Sacred Palace experts gathered on the Sacred Palace Master Square. Yin-Yangzi sat at the head of the table. At the same time, Chun Ling, Long Qing, Qin Yu, and dozens of Sacred Palace chosen and prospective chosen were gathered below. The Sacred Palace chosen and prospective chosen were the first to be tested today. They were the cream of the crop among the many Sacred Palace disciples. To put it bluntly, the strength of their talent could already represent the strength of the other Sacred Palace disciples to a certain extent. If even the chosen and prospective chosen did not have any talent, there was no need to talk about the other disciples. Therefore, Yin-Yangzi only planned to watch the Sacred Palace chosen and prospective chosen's talent test. As for the other disciples, Yin-Yangzi did not have much interest. He nodded at the old servant standing respectfully beside him. Seeing Yin-Yangzi's action, the old man also took a step forward. At the same time, the storage ring in his hand flashed, and a giant stone more than 20 meters tall landed in the center of the square. This was the talent testing stone. It was jade white in color and did not appear to be anything special. Following the appearance of the talent testing stone, Yin-Yangzi said indifferently from the head of the table, "This is the talent testing stone, used to test one's talent. The method of using it is very simple. The center of the stone is hollow and one can enter it. After entering, open your heart, and the talent testing stone will naturally test your talent." As he spoke, everyone saw that there was an entrance on the side of the talent testing stone that led directly to the inside of the stone. It could be said that using the talent testing stone to test one's talent basically did not require one to take the initiative to do anything. One only needed to enter the stone, sit down, and open their heart for the talent testing stone to automatically test the strength of each person's talent. After briefly explaining how to use the talent testing stone, Yin-Yangzi nodded slightly at Shao Xing. Then, Shao Xing opened his mouth and announced the start of the talent testing stone. There were not many people taking the test today, only the Sacred Palace chosen and prospective chosen. As Shao Xing's voice sounded, the prospective chosen were naturally the first to begin. At this moment, a young man strode forward. This person was none other than the prospective chosen of the Wuchen Sacred Hall, Gudu Wu. He chose to be the first to take the test. To be honest, Gudu Wuyao was very curious about the talent testing stone. After all, there was no talent testing stone in the North Star boundary. He strode toward the talent testing stone. Then, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Gudu Wuyao entered the talent testing stone and sat down cross-legged with his eyes closed. At the same time, the talent testing stone began to emit a gentle white light. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 12:31. As the candidate closest to becoming a chosen, Gudu Wuyao was undoubtedly number one among the Sacred Palace candidates. As Gudu Wuyao sat down cross-legged, the talent testing stone began to emit a faint white light. As the white light appeared, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to gather in the air above the talent testing stone, gradually forming a vortex. The appearance of the spiritual energy vortex was the talent testing stone's most direct reflection of a person's talent. In the beginning, the diameter of the spiritual vortex was only 1 meter. This was the weakest talent. As long as one was a martial artist, they would need to have a spiritual vortex of at least 1 meter. It could be said that this was the threshold of martial arts. If a person did not even have the talent of having a spiritual vortex of 1 meter, then they were destined to have no fate with martial arts in this life. This was the first time they witnessed the Central World's talent testing stone. At this moment, everyone's eyes fell on the spiritual energy vortex, and a hint of curiosity flashed across their eyes. Compared to the Sacred Palace group, Yin-Yangzi and the other Taiyang sect experts were much calmer. After all, they had seen this kind of talent-testing stone countless times. Moreover, Guduwuya's talent could only be considered ordinary. However, no one expected that Enyangzi and the others' calmness would soon be shattered. The spiritual energy vortex, which was originally only 1 meter wide, suddenly began to expand. 2 meters, 3 meters, 10 meters, 20 meters, in less than 10 breaths of time, the spiritual energy vortex above Guduwuya's head had expanded to a full 88 meters wide. 88 meters. Although this result wasn't too exaggerated, one couldn't forget that Guduwuya was only a sacred palace candidate. He wasn't even a chosen. The 88-meter-long spirit chi vortex was considered above average even among the prospective saints of the heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect. This kid is really just a sacred palace candidate? A quasi-sage of the heavenly Yin solar sect looked at Xiao Xing and the others in disbelief as he looked down at Guduwuya. It was hard to believe. If Guduwuya was the chosen of the sacred palace and had an 88-meter spirit chi vortex, it would be easier to accept. However, the truth was that Guduwuya was only a prospective chosen. This was a little exaggerated. Facing the question, Dipankara smiled and nodded. His name is Guduwuya. He is indeed the first candidate of our sacred palace. There was nothing to hide. While the experts were still in shock, Guduwuya's talent test ended. He slowly opened his eyes, walked out of the talent test stone, and bowed to the experts on the high platform. At the same time, the quasi-saint supreme sovereign of the heavenly Yin and solar sect also nodded with a smile. This kid is not bad. Although he isn't a chosen, his talent isn't any weaker than a chosen. If he is carefully nurtured, I believe he won't be any weaker than the sacred palace chosen. The quasi-saint supreme sovereign clearly thought highly of Guduwuya. In his opinion, the reason Guduwuya couldn't become a sacred palace chosen wasn't because he wasn't talented enough. On the contrary, Guduwuya's talent had likely surpassed the sacred palace chosen. It was just that he hadn't fully matured yet. At the same time, the quasi-saint supreme sovereign took a deep look at Guduwuya, as if he was thinking about something. No one knew what the quasi-saint supreme sovereign was thinking. After Guduwuya's good start, the other candidates also began their talent tests one after another. Compared to Guduwuya's stunning performance at the beginning, they didn't think there would be anything more eye-catching. But who would have thought that in addition to Guduwuya, there would be 2 more candidates among the sacred palace chosen that surprised the experts of the heavenly Yin and solar sect. One was Huangfueo, whose spiritual energy vortex had reached 87 meters, which was only 1 meter shorter than Guduwuya's. The second was Ouyang Roshue, whose spiritual energy vortex had reached 86 meters. Guduwuya, Huangfueo, and Ouyang Roshue's spiritual energy vortexes were all shocking. At the same time, the gap between the 3 wasn't that big. He had never imagined that the sacred palace would be hiding 3 such talented individuals. Moreover, all 3 of them were only prospective chosen, and not a single one of them was a chosen. Enyangzi was a little stunned by the 3's appearance. But compared to Enyangzi, the other experts of the heavenly Yin and solar sect looked at Xiao Xing's group of 4 with suspicion. There were even some who directly said, "Looks like the sacred palace doesn't have good eyesight. It seems that your sacred palace has poor taste. It's a pity that such a bright pearl was not chosen as a chosen." His words were naturally filled with a hint of reproach. In the eyes of the heavenly Yin sect's experts, Guduwuya's trio's talent was more than enough for them to become holy sons and holy daughters, yet the sacred palace had refused to let them become holy sons and holy daughters. To put it bluntly, the sacred palace had no foresight. After witnessing Guduwuya's group of 3's talents, many of the heavenly Yin and solar sect experts felt that there must be someone among the 10 chosen who wasn't as talented as them. They felt that the pearls were covered in dust. But Xiao Xing only smiled and said, "Everyone, please be patient. The Chosen's and Chosen's talents haven't been tested yet. I believe you'll know once you're done. Xiao Chen said this very casually, but everyone was stunned when they heard it. What did he mean? Could it be that the Chosen of the Sacred Palace were all more talented than Gudu Wuyao? That was impossible, right? Gudu Wuyao's group of 3 had all reached 85 meters, and the highest among them was Gudu Wuyao's, who had reached 88 meters. This was already comparable to the heavenly Yin and solar sects chosen. If the Sacred Palace Chosens and Saintesses were all more talented than Gudu Wuyao, what would that mean? 89 meters? Or more than 90 meters? More than 90 meters? That was absolutely impossible. If one's talent reached 90 meters, they could become a true Chosen in the Central World. It was a little too exaggerated, so the heavenly Yin and solar sect experts believed Shaoxing's words. But they couldn't embarrass Shaoxing on the spot, so they could only secretly mock him. Compared to the others' doubts, Yin Yangzi's interest was piqued. Shaoxing spoke so confidently that it didn't seem like he was exaggerating at all. Therefore, Yin Yangzi was looking forward to the Sacred Palace's Chosen's talent test. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. Chapter 1232. The experts from the Yin and Yang sects all thought that Gudu Wuyao and the other 2 were pearls covered in dust. With their talent, it shouldn't be a problem for them to become chosen in a quasi-saint sect like the Sacred Palace. However, all 3 of them were Sacred Palace candidates, and not a single one of them was a chosen. It could be said that they felt a sense of injustice for the 3 of them. However, such doubts would soon be dispelled because from now on, it was finally the Sacred Palace Chosen's turn to test their talent. All the candidates had already finished their tests. Apart from Gudu Wuyao, Huangfu Ao, and Ouyang Roshue, who had outstanding performances, the rest of them did not have much to say. Their talents were basically at the level of 60 or 70, which was not considered top-notch. The previous test had left a deep impression on the Gudu Wuyao trio. Now, it was the turn of the Sacred Palace Chosens and Saintesses. For a time, everyone on the high platform once again focused their attention on the talent testing stone. Now that Xiao Chen was not around, there were only 9 of the 10 holy sons and holy daughters left in the Holy Palace. The first one to come out for the test was Jiang Yu, who was ranked 10th, which meant that he was at the bottom of the list. He was in charge of the Mountain Holy Palace of the Holy Palace. The test should be conducted according to the ranking, so Jiang Yu was the first to step forward. Under everyone's gaze, he strode into the talent testing stone. As Jiang Yu sat down cross-legged, the experts from the Yin and Yang sects on the high platform couldn't take their eyes off him. They all wanted to see how capable this Sacred Palace Chosen was to be able to prevent Gudu Wuyao and the other 2 from becoming chosen. Under everyone's gaze, the talent testing stone glowed with a faint white light again. At the same time, a spirit energy vortex slowly formed above Jiang Yu's head. 1 meter, 5 meters, 10 meters, 50 meters. In an instant, Jiang Yu's spirit energy vortex broke through the 80-meter mark. It quickly surpassed Ouyang Roshue's 86 meters, then Huangfu Ao's 87 meters, and finally reached the same height as Gudu Wuyao's 88 meters. Seeing that his spirit energy vortex had reached 88 meters, which was the same height as Gudu Wuyao's, the experts from the Yin and Yang sects who were originally complaining about Gudu Wuyao and the other 2 couldn't help but speak up. But before they could say anything, someone else spoke up. It's still growing. His spirit energy vortex is still growing. Sure enough, Jiang Yu's spirit energy vortex finally reached the 89-meter mark. An 89-meter-long spiritual qi vortex. It was even stronger than Gudu Wuyao's. Such a result was beyond the expectations of the experts of the Solar Sect and Heavenly Yin Sect. They hadn't expected this at all. Jiang Yu's result surprised everyone. Next up was the ninth holy maiden, Yun Chuan. She was in charge of the flowing stream sacred hall. Yun Chuan sat down cross-legged on the stone. Her spirit energy vortex quickly took shape, and like Jiang Yu, it stopped at the 89-meter mark. Jiang Yu and Yun Chuan's innate talent had both reached 89 meters. After them, Hu Fei and Quan Lan's innate talent had also reached 89 meters. Of the 10 holy sons and holy maidens of the sacred palace, apart from Shao Qin, 4 of them had reached the 89-meter mark. The experts from the Yin and Yang sects couldn't believe their eyes. Fortunately, no one had managed to reach the 90-meter mark yet. Otherwise, it would have been a huge shock to everyone. No one had reached the 90-meter mark? Just as everyone was thinking about this, it was Bai Yi's turn to take the test. His spirit energy vortex began to expand at a terrifying speed as soon as it was formed. It soon reached the 89-meter mark, but it wasn't over yet. His spirit energy vortex was still growing, but at a much slower rate. This person's talent has reached the 90-meter mark? A 90-meter mark was already a person who had a slight chance of becoming a holy son or holy maiden of the central world. Moreover, even in the Yin and Yang sects, a 90-meter mark was enough to compete with the top holy sons. In the entire Yin and Yang sects, excluding the true holy sons and holy maidens, there were only 5 people who had reached the 90-meter mark. Was such a peerless genius about to appear in the sacred palace? Everyone stared at the spirit energy vortex above Bai Yi's head in disbelief. Under everyone's gaze, Bai Yi's spirit energy vortex finally stopped at a height of 90 meters above the ground. What's his name? What's his name? This old man wants to accept him as a disciple. This old man wants to accept him as a disciple. It really reached the 90-meter mark. For a moment, a quasi-sage great sovereign couldn't care less about his image and asked Shao Xing's group of 4. He immediately decided to accept Bai Yi as a disciple. A 90-meter mark was definitely a peerless genius. Even if he couldn't enter the saint rankings in the future and become a true holy son or holy maiden, he would definitely be ranked in the first echelon below them. Such a heaven's pride was naturally exciting. In the face of the quasi-sage great sovereign's excitement, Shao Xing replied truthfully with a smile. While everyone was talking, Bai Yi completed the test. Then, the Lotus Emperor strode out. Seeing the Qing Emperor walk out, the experts gathered their thoughts and focused their attention on him. Bai Yi had shocked them too much just now. What kind of result would the Qing Emperor give them now? They had completely forgotten about the Guduwia trio. They had previously thought that the Guduwia trio were pearls covered in dust, but now it seemed that wasn't the case. The reason why the 3 of them weren't ranked as holy sons and holy maidens of the sacred palace was entirely because the holy sons and holy maidens of the sacred palace were indeed stronger than them. At the very least, from the beginning of Jiang Yu's test until now, none of the holy sons and holy maidens of the sacred palace were weaker than Guduwia trio. After a moment of staring at the Qing Emperor, who was already sitting cross-legged, someone exclaimed. Another heaven's pride at the 90-meter mark. Emperor Qing's spiritual energy vortex broke through the 90-meter mark with an unstoppable momentum. Someone exclaimed in surprise, but before he could finish speaking, the expert stood up abruptly as if he had seen a ghost and cried out, "What the hell is going on? It's still growing, it's still growing." The Azure Emperor's spiritual chi whirlpool reached 90 meters, but it didn't stop there. Instead, it continued to grow. Sensing this, the experts of the Taiyang sect on the high platform could no longer sit still. Their mouths were agape, and their jaws dropped to the ground. It could be said that they were dumbfounded. While they were dumbfounded, the Qing Emperor's spirit energy vortex finally stabilized at the 92-meter mark. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1233. 92 meters, even taller than Bai. At this moment, the experts of the heavenly solar sect could no longer remain calm. What was going on? How could a small secondary saint sect have so many peerless prodigies? Azure Emperor and Bai, no matter who they would definitely be the strongest below the chosen in the heavenly solar sect. The experts of the heavenly solar sect were making a fuss over nothing. They were either saints or secondary saints, yet they were shocked to such an extent by what they saw. In fact, they couldn't be blamed. They weren't shocked because they hadn't seen such monstrous prodigies before. On the contrary, there were people in the heavenly solar sect who were more talented than Azure Emperor and Bai, but those were chosen and saintesses who were truly ranked on the saint rankings. Moreover, with the strength of the sacred palace, a mere secondary saint sect, and even among the secondary saint sects, the sacred palace wasn't considered the top. However, such a place had suddenly produced so many peerless prodigies. How could this not be shocking? It was like discovering a true dragon in a small pond. It wasn't the true dragon that was shocked, but the pond itself. It was the same principle. With the end of Azure Emperor's test, the experts of the heavenly solar sect didn't know what to say. However, they didn't have the ability to predict the future, so they obviously didn't know. The shock was only the beginning. Everything before was merely an appetizer. Because next was Chen Yu, Long Qing, and Chen Ling's test. If the 10 chosens and chosens of the sacred palace were to be categorized into 3 levels, the weakest of which were naturally Quan Lan, Hu Fei, Yun Chuan, and Jiang Yu. This could be seen from their talent test result. All 4 of them had talents of the 89-meter scale, so there wasn't much of a difference between them. The second level was by and Azure Emperor. Both of their talents had reached 90 meters, clearly widening the gap between them and Quan Lan and the other 3. As for the first level, it was naturally Shao Chen and the other 3, starting from Chen Yu. No matter how one looked at it, Shao Chen, Chen Ling, Long Qing, and Shao Chen were all far superior to the other saints. In the North Star boundary, only Shao Chen and the other 3 had the strength to fight one-on-one with the other quasi-sage sex saints. Unbeknownst to them, what happened next was truly shocking. At this moment, Chen Yu was the first to walk out. He lazily walked into the talent testing stone and sat cross-legged. Perhaps it was because they had yet to recover from the shock of the Azure Dharch. At this moment, the many experts of the heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect were still thinking about the Azure Thearka's 92-meter long spirit chi whirlpool. While everyone was still in a daze, Chen Yu's test began. The spiritual energy vortex above his head surged wildly and quickly broke through the 90-meter mark. However, its momentum did not decrease. In an instant, it surpassed the 92-meter mark and surpassed Emperor Qing. Seeing that the spiritual energy vortex above Chen Yu's head had surpassed his own, the Qing Emperor revealed a helpless and bitter smile. As expected, the Qing Emperor knew Chen Yu too well. This guy was an unfathomable existence, mysterious and terrifying. It surpassed. Amidst the shock, someone finally noticed Chen Yu's spiritual energy vortex and involuntarily exclaimed. Hearing this, everyone's eyes frantically gathered on Chen Yu. The spiritual energy vortex had already reached the 95-meter mark. 96 meters. 97 meters. 98. At the 95th meter, Chen Yu's spiritual energy vortex continued to grow. Under the watchful eyes of everyone present, it finally stopped at the 99th meter. A 98-meter spiritual energy vortex. Such talent, how to put it, was not inferior to the saints of the heavenly Yin and Taiyang sects. This could no longer be described as shocking, but terrifying. It was simply unimaginable that such a monstrous existence existed in a small quasi-sage sect. Even Yin Yangzi, who was sitting on the main seat, had a slight change in expression. Even the great saints were shocked. But Chen Yu walked out of the talent testing stone with an indifferent expression and immediately returned to the crowd. A 98-meter spiritual energy vortex could be said to be the top talent in this world. Those who could reach this level were all existences who had left their names on the saint ranking, but today, one of them had appeared in the sacred palace. Chen Yu's result made the experts of the heavenly Yin and Taiyang sects feel like the world was going crazy. However, as Long Qing and Chen Ling finished their tests, the experts' shock quickly turned into numbness. Why? Because Long Qing and Chen Ling's spiritual energy vortex had also reached the 98-meter mark. In other words, there were 3 people in the sacred palace who had reached the 98-meter mark. With such talent, as long as there were no accidents, they would definitely occupy a place on the saint ranking in the future. They were already numb and no longer shocked. There were just too many monstrous existences in the sacred palace. There was no need to mention Emperor Qing and Bai Yi, but Chen Ling, Long Qing, and Chen Yu's 98-meter spiritual energy vortex made the experts laugh. Amidst their numbness, the way the crowd looked at Xiao Xing's group of 4 also changed. It was hard to imagine what kind of sect this was. A small quasi-sage sect actually had so many monstrous existences. There were 7 people whose spiritual energy vortex exceeded the 85-meter mark, 5 who reached the 90-meter mark, and 3 of them who reached the 98-meter mark. The way the crowd looked at Xiao Xing's group of 4 had changed. They really didn't know what kind of person could nurture so many monstrous existences, each more terrifying than the last. Xiao Xing's group of 4 was actually a little surprised by the crowd's different gazes. Although they knew that Chen Yu and the others' spiritual energy vortex weren't weak, they didn't expect it to be so ridiculous. After all, the spiritual energy vortex didn't exist in the North Star boundary, so it was impossible to directly understand a person's spiritual energy vortex. Everyone was done with the test, but the experts still hadn't recovered from their shock. It was also at this moment that a cold female voice sounded from outside the square. "Ancestor, the 3 of us also want to test our spiritual energy vortex." The sudden voice made everyone look in the direction of the voice. At a glance, the crowd saw Qin Shuru, 100-Flower Fairy, and Gu Lingyao standing proudly at the edge of the square. The 3 of them weren't chosen of the sacred palace, so according to the rules, they naturally weren't qualified to participate in today's spiritual energy vortex. Therefore, the 3 of them were stopped when they entered the square. Xiao Xing didn't make the decision after hearing Qin Shuru's words. Instead, he looked at Yinyangzi, obviously intending to let Yinyangzi make the decision. After all, he was the only one present, the great sage, and had the absolute right to speak. Please collect, vote, recommend. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.